Settle in. This is a quiet evening walk through the Russian Empire. Volga barges moving like slow barns on water, the Yampost stations, where fresh horses stamp by a lamp, and the ledger winter roads packed hard as stone with sleighs and soft bells canal locks that stitch the Baltic to the Caspian, and the samovar breathing gently on a wooden table in a warmest bar. Well, move slowly, no arguments, no loud music, no sudden cuts, just a steady voice and a gentle bed of sound. If sleep arrives, that's the plan when you wake. The story will be right where you left it. The first part. Dawn meets the river on its best behavior. Light loosens along the reeds, takes the chill out of the mist, and finds the tar seam on a hemp towline where last night's drip set like a black eyelid. A barge sits 3 palms off the bank, nose turned to the lock, hull paint long past pride. The towline runs forward to a horse on the path, a steady mare in a canvas breast collar, with a second line coiled, ready in case Ben's ask for a helper. The harness creaks like an old door that knows the family. A boy rubs the mare's neck and checks the buckle holes with his finger, without counting out loud. On deck, a man shuffles the lead line back into a square coil. The plummet wears a smear of tallow at its base when it kissed bottom a minute ago. It brought up a thin ration of sand and a little silk good news. He wipes the grease with a rag and lays the line by the forward bit, stopper over the coil so the river can't borrow it. Next to the bit, a wooden mallet, wedge-ended, for persuading a swollen pin, a handspiker gaff with its hook ground blunt, so it won't write history in wood when a push will do. We are upriver from Tver, where the canals stitch north and west water to the wide Volga. The lacquer brick-walled throat with timber gates and big iron shoulders wears frost the colour of flour along its upper stones. The keeper's house keeps a low window on the scene in it, a lamp and a white cup. On the lock wall, a depth board leans into the day. Its marks easy enough that a sleepy man won't mistake one for another. The keeper steps out with his cap pulled square, walks the coping with a stick that likes to point at hinges, and looks once at the sky as if it could be late for anything. Rope first, we throw the heaving line a soft weight in its crown not toward the bollard above the gate. The boy on the wall catches without ceremony, bends on the messenger, and hauls the towline up hand over hand. Hemp comes like a well-behaved snake. It rides the bollard twice, lays flat, and waits for the signal. The skipper stands by the tiller, his shoulders level, to fingers on the spoke, eyes on the gate cheeks where Morse keeps its counsel. He says nothing. The river says less. You can let your attention slip a bit. Here where the rope hums and the horse leans. Nothing explodes on a schedule. This everything happens at the speed of breath and wood. The keeper raps a hinge with his stick, then puts his shoulder to the balance beam. The upstream gates unpin with a complaint that insults no one, and the pool inside shows its tired back a round of water lower by a man's chest. He nods to the windlass crew. They take the poles off, lay hands to spokes, and turn. The paddles in the lower doors lift a curl of brown water shoulders through, then widens into a proper push. The barge noses against the flow, and then rides it down with nothing more than a hand on the gaff to keep her from learning new ideas about brick. On the towpath, the boy walks the mare quicker than a stroll, slower than a run. He keeps the line high with a forked stick where birch branches lean, then lets it rest when the path clears. A second man watches the catenary like a hawk, calling a half word when slack looks like the beginning of mischief. The mare's ears flick when the gaff knocks. She understands more about boats than some men do. A stove ring clinks down below. Then a breath of coal smoke pushes through the hatch. A samovar sits on a low table in the cabin, Tula brass, dented, proud without making a scene. The draft tube glows, the water whispers at the edge, and a tea glass waits in a podstacanic, its handle tired of being useful. Sugar sits in a paper twist that remembers a shop. Someone sets out to slices of black bread and a slice of cheese that sweats honesty. Tea in these parts adds work to the day by making hours kinder rather than shorter. The lock's chamber drops 1 board, then 2. The keeper leans to the little rule scratched along the coping and nods without wasting sound. He closes the paddles and the water lays down, The lower gates open with the broad body language of gates that will be here long after we are not. The buoy and deck eases a fender rope and cork against the wall. The skipper lays the tiller a hand and half and murmurs to the gaff man without giving him words to carry. The barge glides out to a world the same as it was 10 minutes ago, which is all anyone asks of a lock. On the lock house table, a ledger with columns, the day's page already tongued into readiness. The keeper writes small truths: boat name, direction, cargo mixed timber billets, sacks of rye, barrels of lamp oil that mine their hoops, tow team 1 mare, rope to coils hemp, and the hour. He presses a dot beside the hour, wipes the nib on a rag, and turns the book toward the skipper. The skipper signs the way men do who have signed in enough rooms to use less ink rather than more. The keeper tears a ticket for a lower gate farther on and slides it across, then looks past the 2 men to the horse, as if to thank the real hand in this business. Back aboard, we put the lead down again. As the river widens, the tallow kisses bottom, returns with a dirty grey that tells of clay under the keel and the little sticks, good for staying straight. The line carries maker's marks in knots 1, 2, 3 farther than a man wants to swim, and we count them as if they mattered to our insides. They do. The skipper says enough when the keel thinks too hard about old snags. A light push with the gaff, and she obeys without sulk. On the bank, the towpath runs between willow and open earth, with little white posts every so often, as if somebody raised a polite fence and changed his mind halfway through. An old steel shoe sits on a stump. Someone hammered it round a stone to keep the path from becoming a hole. The mare puts her feet where the path points, not where the world does. A harness strap needs a whole ast of it. The boy uses a marlin spike and patience to make one, then rubs a touch of tallow into the new edge so it will not remember today as an insult. Patchwork work keeps the barge afloat more than money does. A plank seam aft has been teasing us since the first bend this morning, a thin damp line that never grows and yet never loses interest. Oakum and pitch live in a tin. The tin lives under a bench. We pick a little oakum with a hook, tease it to a line, and drive it toward the seam with the wedge mallet. Then a warm smear of pitch with a spoon we keep for this and nothing else. The pitch shines and quits showing off. We wait a moment, then press with a wet rag. The seam decides to mind the season again. A fair lead near the bow is proud, and will say so if not parleyed. We take a file to the inner edge, work until the bug goes from fingernail to ghost, and then rub a dab of tallow there too. Rope likes kindness to be specific. Nobody on this river ever argued a rope into loyalty. It has to be asked and then thanked. A bell at the next post station rings, not loudly, 1 note at a time. The yam hut stands back from the path, fresh horse smelling the future. At stations like these, a lamp lives by day on a nail and by night on a window. A woman in a kerchief steps out with a ladle and a pail, not for us, for the mare, but she looks at the tow line as if it were a kind of animal she must learn, too. The station ledger lives in a tin box. The keeper opens the lid, takes out the book, and does the math. He enjoys fewer words than the lockman, more numbers. He rolls a date stamp across the ticket with his palm, kneading dough. The ink knows the tune. If drowsiness steals you for a bit, the mare will still put her feet where feet go, and the rope will keep its gentle vowel between bank and bit. Nothing here asks to be watched every second. Mid-morning, the wind comes across the low fields like a decision. We shorten the tow by a fathom to keep the line off the water. Weight likes to sneak aboard when men forget physics. A man leans on the handspike at the capstan once, just to remind the drum that we know how to turn it without being angry. The pull says tick with a voice that could settle a room all by itself. We take a half turn off the forward bit and lay it neat. The line hums, then resigns. The cargo shows its character without speeches. Timber billets ride low. Thick and modest sacks ride higher. Air between them like words. Between careful people barrels rock on a frown if you do not cradle them with wedges. We slide to in, so the hoops stop making their song. A deckhand chalks a mark on a hatch. Rye, forward, a triangle for the oil. Across 4 things that must not meet sparks. Chalk in a place like this is a kind of law that does not need police. The river swings around a gravel bar you would never see if you came here only when the world photographs itself. The lead line tells you where the polite water keeps its conversation. We choose the outside by a little, and the gaff man inclines his whole chest toward the wall of air where a current lives. He pushes once. The barge understands. A cormorant inspects us with bureaucratic disinterest and goes back to his fishing. A second lock comes like a memory of the first, except the keeper has a mustache emphatic enough to be its own citizen. He raises a hand as we come on and begins the same old dance battles, beams, the quiet whistle between boards. The boy on the wall today fumbles the heaving line once, recovers with a grin no one punishes, and then pays attention the length of a gate. We pass in, we pass out. The mustache salutes as if it were harder work than it is. We salute the mustache, which is proper. 80 pours on the far side. The samovar sings a little. We pour into 2 glasses and add a lemon slice, thin as a promise and twice as bright. The glass burns if you hold it wrong, so we do not. Sugar knocks on enamel. Bread accepts hands without crumbling. The stove forgets its temper and becomes a corner man for another hour. A spoon stands in the glass by habit and then remembers itself and leans. The river goes on, kind to such small theatre. The towpath tilts around a stand of birch where roots loosen the earth. We slow the mare to careful, then faster than careful. A spike of iron driven in last season keeps the bank from telling stories to gravity. Somebody hammered that spike with fewer words than we allot to tea. It does what it was asked to do. The mare nods to it on the way by, the way animals nod to things that matter but cannot eat. By noon a thin skin of ice that flirted with the shaded edges is gone. The depth board at a side cut shows water a hand higher than last week. We shorten the downriver spares the coiled lines on the foredeck by a turn, so they do not learn bad habits from their own weight. A second mare comes out from a farm track and puts her nose to our mare's shoulder. We give them both the small apple kept for this. Trade sometimes runs on coins today, it runs on apples and patience. A cooper from the village upstream walks along the wall of the next lock to cross and lifts his hat toward our barrels reflexively, like a man passing cousins. He has a hoop ring onto fingers the way some men wear seals. He looks at our wedges and nods once to say good. Our barrels pretend not to hear. They ride quieter for the compliment. Behind the barge, the wake forgets its argument in one breath and goes to tell its jokes to reeds. In the cabin, the samovar empties itself with a sigh, the charcoal a little mound of well-behaved orange. Someone knocks the draft tube with a coin to check for a sulk no sulk. A cloth goes over the spout, the kind that knows the shape of this brass and has decided not to judge. The lead line comes out one last time for the day's shallow reach. Tallow returns a seed or two and a whisper of clay. We put the coil away with the same care we began with coils left arrogant by you when weather changes. A boy takes the heaving line and practices a throw toward a stump until the crown not learns the air again. He throws short, then long, then right. He laughs at the right one because not laughing would tempt fate. Afternoon lengthens, then thickens. The wind forgets its interest. The mare leans, the towline hums in a lower key, and the plank seam stays cured, as if the pitch had listened to sense for once. The keeper at the day's last gate writes us in without looking up, because everybody in this quarter knows our hull by the paint and the astern name carved shallow and felt before it's seen. He tears a ticket for morning and puts his hand on the paper a second longer than usual when he hands it over, as if to give it weight. Paper appreciates that kind of theatre. We tie up above the next lock where the bank has decided to be generous. The mare gets her nose bag and the cloth. She lets as the cloth more than the bag, but the bag answers questions the cloth can't. We throw a spring line and take to turns around a bollard. The lines lie like good work. On deck we set the handspike under the capstan spokes and tuck the mallet alongside, head inward, so a foot in the night will meet wood and not speak about stars. The hatch gets its little brass pin. Brass looks fine in last light. The cabin sets its own order. The glass goes back to the shelf, the pod stacanic to its hook, the sugar twist in a jar against mice with arguments. A lamp climbs its nail and learns to burn low. Wick trim to behave. The ledger on the table takes the day in a line that would make a priest proud plain and neat, and we put a small dot by the word seam to remind ourselves to look at it again in the morning, even though it looks as if it has promised already. Outside, the lock house window turns the color of bread. The keeper's shadow stands and sits as he clinks his cup at the sink. A bell one reach away says time the way bells do who got their job by not being loud. We set the tow line on its peg to dry, rub the fare leader last wipe, and lay the heaving line ready, neat crown fat with proper pride. The mare lowers her head. The river keeps its place without our help. The night will not move the bank. If you drift off now, the water and rope will remember exactly where your ears left them. This reach can be found in the morning without looking. The second part. The winter road begins where the ruts forget themselves and the snow decides to be a floor. The night's wind has dressed the ditches and left a hard skin across the open, and the spruce at the field edge lean as if listening. A verse stone stands by the verge, whitewashed and square-shouldered, its top rubbed smooth by many mittens checking distance with no need to read. The sleigh runners draw a neat twin line, iron shoes whisper on packed snow bells under the collar give a small, round note that makes horses and men keep the same patience. The post station sits low against the wind, plank walls chinked with moss, the window panes fuzzed with frost that looks like ferns remembering spring. The yard is a square of trampled white and drifted brown, a few hay bales under a net, a shed with a black lip where soot cannot be bothered to hide. To sledges wait with shafts up, one wears broad shoes on its runners for soft days, the other keeps narrow steel for the cold that holds. A rack by the door carries harness breast collars, traces, breechings oiled, mended, trimmed. A driver's knife lives in a slit of the rack, blade short, edge honest, for cutting a frozen knot without teaching it drama. Inside, warmth gathers in the corners the way flour gathers at the edge of a board. A brick stove keeps a steady back. By the door, a bench, 4 boots and a peg for mittens on the wall. The station ledger and a tin of ink that takes coaxing with a warm thumb. A samovar breathes a low, agreeable sound on the table. A glass sits in its hold, of sugar lumps wait in a cloth. The postmaster, broad belt, wool vest polished by elbows, opens the leather pouch with both care and speed. Wax wafers on the cords show their pressed faces and then crumble obediently to a knife-tip letters stack in order, each with a place to be and the measure of the road to use up getting there. Horses first. The stable smells of hay and damp heat and a clean, dull iron of shoes that met road yesterday and will meet it again. A boy brings the shaft horse a steady bay with a mark on his forehead like a thumb left in flour, and the side horses for a winter troika. The center horse takes the shafts and a collar with bells. The outside pair wear breast straps and long traces to the crossbar. The harness goes on in remembered steps, pad set, collar lifted, ears folded and freed, thongs through rings, trace hook seated with a good click. A dab of tallow on the billet holes keeps leather from learning sharpness. The driver's mitten rubs the bit with a slice of bread so a cold mouth will not reject the day. The sledge itself gets its small care. A pot of runner wax tallow with a whisper of lamp blacks it's near the stove. A brush works it into the grain. Then a strip of felt burnishes until the surface looks like ice decided to have a twin. The brake shoe gets a look its spring should argue, not shout. A hand under the crossbar learns where a wood pin thinks of cracking and then forgets the thought because someone cared to notice. The shovel and axe go into their rack along the driver's thigh. No need for speeches about why. Documents are a winter heat of their own. The postmaster takes the Padora's nigh a folded paper that is less a pass than a polite promise, sprinkles a grain of sand where ink would smudge, writes a line about team and route, and presses his station stamp into a wafer that softens under the lamp flame. The stamp shows a simple sign the next station trusts more than any man's face. Station, date, direction, wait guest within a ring of reason. The driver signs with a steady hand that prefers small letters and sets the paper in the dry pocket of his coat. A packet of letters for the next to towns slides into the leather bag under the seatboard and gets tied with a cord whose knot opens when you tell it, not when ice tries to explain things. Out in the yard again, we test the load with a push of the knee, sacks of flour low and centered, a crate of lamp oil with straw under and between, a bundle of tools for a smith, 1 district over, 3 letters for a bookshop that will not open until noon and yet matters to a man whose window faces east. Overall, a felt throw tied with 2 bands over the throw, a small rope net to deny the wind arguments. The driver checks the thongs with a twist that tells shape more than sight. He speaks to the horses by breathing in, not out. The team leans before his hands move. Good teams know the day by the silence at the start. We reach the station gate at a trot that honors ice and ignores haste. Past the fence, the road folds away under the sleigh with a sound like paper, choosing to turn its own pages. Markers stand at intervals, tall poles with a wisp of straw or a black slat, so a man in a night squall can count his way to a door. A hayrick in the far field holds its long white hat with dignity. The driver lifts one rein, then lowers it. His hands spend most of their time believing in the first right answer. A verse stone passes, then another. Every so often, the road crew's work shows in a clean, hard bank on the sides, retamped after a wind. We cross a small bridge of logs that learn to be smooth under many runners. The horses listen with their hooves and tell the sleigh something we cannot name, but can feel in our ribs. The drivers whip a stiff stick with a thin thong rides low, a pointer not a punishment. He touches the thong to the bell strap once, pretending to teach it to speak softer. It does not need teaching. The first change point comes with smoke and a square of sledges set aside like loaves cooling. A boy takes the reins while the driver checks harness with one hand and signs the station sheet with the other. Collars off. Collars on bells move to the fresh horse traces unhooked and hooked to jerk to test. A finger to settle a biscuit to the bay, as if to apologize for being brief. The postmaster's wife sets a plate with 2 slices of rye and a pickle, and says nothing the way people say a great deal. Tea goes down. Breath returns. The station stamp kisses the paper again. We are back on the road before the samovar's next sigh. If your mind eases sideways for a minute, the runners will keep the right conversation with the snow, and the bells will carry the thread until you rejoin them. Winter roads appreciate being trusted. The wind decides to try a lesson and sends fine snow low across the surface as if sweeping with a new broom. The driver shortens the outside traces by 1 hole to give the side horses more say when the sleigh leans. He plants his boots wider on the footboard, knees soft to listen. One hand loosens the brake a finger and a half on the down slope iron skims. Does not bite. At a drift, he reads the color blue in the hollow, white on the crest, and chooses the line that keeps all 3 necks the same length. The sleigh agrees. The letters under the throw agree. The wind finds something else to bully. A long stretch opens, river ice made honest by a week of care. Branches thrust in the snow mark the passage like a dotted sentence. Here the runners sing in a lower key, the bells settle to notes that make a small room for thoughts. A man walking the opposite way pulls his scarf down to let his face breathe. He raises his mitten in a half salute. We answer with the whipstock in the air. No words. The cold eats words faster than bread. A village goes by as a row of roofs practicing patience. Smoke rises like lines on a slate. A woman brushes snow from her well cover with a broom of birch twigs. The cover knows this conversation and sits sweeter for it. A boy drags a sled smaller than he is and leaves a second script on the road's edge where ours runs bold. Dogs object in the language of place and then forget the reason for the speech. At the next post house, the ledger waits open. The postmaster there is a man who listens with his eyebrows. He points to the scale. We set the small crate on the pan. The bean finds level a leaf weight, and another settle minor questions. He chalks a mark on the box where the next man will find it with poor light. He reaches for the stamp and warms it above the lamp, so wax will take a crisp face. Then returns it to its tin with the same care as a man truing a wheel. The station girl slides 3 sugar lumps under her palm toward the driver and looks at his mittens as if to ask whether the seam he mended yesterday held. He flexes his hand. The seam offers no complaint. Good. Horses again. The fresh team brings steam and curiosity. We set collars with a lift and a turn and make sure the bell thong sits where it belongs, under the throat, not near the windpipe. A driver with less practice might let it ride to high and teach a cough. This one does not. A quick hand rub on each shoulder, a ritual without superstition, tells the animal and the man both where the day sits. We tuck a hand into the breast strap to feel warmth where rub would preach trouble. No sermon today. Onward. And a field opens the way a room opens when a door is found in the dark by hand. The verse stone stands alone here, pale and unpersuaded. The varnish from last spring still makes its face a shade glossier than the snow around it. The driver taps it with the whipstock just once, as if it were an old friend who likes to be reminded of names. He leans forward and tightens the lines, not to pull, but to send the notion that we are still partnered. The team takes the notion into their shoulders and returns it as movement. Near a low ridge, the wind stacks the road with a drift that grew while men were elsewhere. The shovel comes down from the rack. The driver opens a trench to runnerwards and drops the drifts back with a cut where the wind won't fetch it up again. The axe chops a crust into steps. He works with his hood up, breath slow and regular. Not a fight, simply persuasion. The team stands with heads down and ears forward as if listening to their own names. A string of hay dust blows and the work ends without speeches. Back aboard, the sledge goes through as if the road had always fit. The day leans toward blue. A low river crossing carries us under willows whose thin ones rattle like dry grass. Ice in the oxbow takes on a sound like a bell that has learned good manners. The driver's shoulders loosen a notch. The horses take it for permission to stretch their necks. The reins allow it. Trust runs both ways more profitably than oats. One last station for the afternoon. The stove in this one keeps a pot of buckwheat that will not say no to a spoon. The bench holds 2 pairs of felt boots drying with paper stuffed in their throats. On a peg, a lamp chimney sits clean, waiting its oil. The ledger here is a ruled card nailed to the wall, names. They look like footprints that learn to stand still. The postmaster's wife puts a slice of dried apple beside the tea glass because she has a practice of giving what the road cannot pack. A dog by the stove does arithmetic with its back legs and then accepts that it has solved enough for one day. We take the night team out darker coats to make the snow brighter by comparison and hang a hood on the bells. It will speak a little less and not wake doors that do not need to wake. The driver sets the lanterns on the sledge posts and trims their wicks to a tone that won't teach smoke to write on the air. He rubs each lens with a rag that remembers being flour sacking. The wind spends its last coins and goes quiet. The final reach to the town runs under open sky here. The verse stones stand closer, like sentences getting ready to stop. Lamps show on the far bank, and the sound of a gate bar lifting somewhere is like a quiet rumour. We keep our own lights steady and our hands simple. The team dips their heads at the bridge step, then rises as if the road has an invisible floor a hand above the real one. The runners find that floor and ride it. We come to the postyard gate and turn in with a curve that will look better from a window than from a photograph nobody will take. The sleigh stops the way a statement stops when the thought is finished, but hospitality remains. Collars open, bells off, traces slung, backs rubbed with handfuls of hay that sing against coats, a nose pressed into a pocket that once held an apple and will not hold one again. The pouch goes to the desk. The stamp kisses wax. The ledger admits us and promises morning. Inside, the table takes cups and elbows as if that were wood's purpose. The samovar sings in the corner, bread breaks and butter remembers, milk sugar dissolves with a sound like a friendly idea. Outside, the verse stone at the yard's entrance leans into lamplight and stops being a measure long enough to become a decoration. The bells hang quiet on their nail and consider how tomorrow will ask them to speak again. Sleep finds the road easily in winter houses. The boots go beneath the bench with their toes out, the mittens hang by their thumbs, the whip thong drapes across a peg like a well-behaved string. Let us rest in the strongbox, no part of them impatient about night. The last lamp goes low with a turn, not a puff. In the yard, the sledges settle with a dry creak, and the stable breath slows until it matches the stove's brick. The road will wait exactly where it stopped. The third part. Before the Neva carries the day out to the roadsteads, the yard wakes the wayward wakes by opening its grain to cold, and then forgiving it. Blocks of pine cradle a small coaster's belly on the slip wedges, sit proud and deliberate along the keel. A chalk line hangs from a nail, not a thought that won't be lost if a wind comes. The great yellow fog downstream is still a rumour back here. There is rope, iron and breath. A brazier hums by the tar kettle. The kettle's lid moves once as pitch remembers to be liquid. We start with listening. A shipwright walks the blocks with a mallet that has learned to say 3 words solid. Hi, and mind, that is all a hole needs to hear from a mallet before noon. He taps each wedge, then presses his palm to the planking to feel whether yesterday's caulking has decided to sit where it was asked. The plank seems wear oakum like sober stitches. Oakum is simply rope and made and taught to be reborn. It goes in dry and comes up tar brown when the seam gets dressed. The caulker's iron spoon-nosed, mushroom-headed rides the mallet's rhythm, and the thread of fibre disappears between boards with a dignity that never raises its voice. Pitch cooks, not boils. A boy stirs with a stick that remembers last week's kettle. He keeps the skin from pretending to become the whole. A smear on the iron's face teaches it to glide a brush across the seam, draws a dark line, and then the wood drinks. A little steam rises, smells of pine and patience, and vanishes into the cold. Nearby, a bucket of sand waits for the iron that forgets its temper. The iron enters the sand, remembers manners, and comes out ready to work again. Spar off next. A batten leans against the wall with a list of figures written in soap, length, taper, and the points where the draw knife must think twice and then obey. To men roll a massed blank larch, straight enough to make arguments unnecessary onto trestles. They sight down the stick, chalk its quarters, and begin to plane. The shavings come in long, soft curls. They fall to the floor, where a boy will later sweep them into sacks for stove men who think shavings in a fire smell worthy days. A spoke shave rides the shoulder, the taper quiets, a gauge ring slides and stops where inches agree with drawings. At the thick end, an auger opens a socket that will take the sheave. The sheave lies in a tray with other elm cheeks, brass axle waiting their turn to be set and forgotten. Rigging bench, hemp rope coils like well-minded snakes. A serving mallet walks a thin tarred line around a stay, while to men worm and parcel fill the crawl with thin stuff. Lay a strip of canvas, then wind serving tight. TAR is not a perfume, but it says weather will try and fail better than any speech. An eye splice grows under the left hand, marlin spike marking the lay. The strands tuck, smooth, and turn into a ring. Trust with your life, and never feel the need to mention it. Above the floor, the sail loft lifts its comb. Bolts of canvas lie like pale rivers. A palm and needle travel. The stitch is long short, so a tear, should it come, will hesitate. A woman chalks a curve with a batten and cuts along the line with shears that know when to suggest, when to insist. A man hems a bolt rope into the leech with his knee against the cloth and his mind in the same room, his fingers. At the window, a child holds a palm clumsily and learns to push the needle with the heel and not the point. The cloth forgives the experiment. The palm shows a small, proud bruise that will teach the lesson better tomorrow. You can let your attention ease here. Needles find their track without comment. Below, the mallet keeps the yard in time. The river puts a little shine on the fast slip and then pretends to be too busy to care. Back on the slip, we set shores for a little heel. A handspike leans into a capstan once the whole shifts less than a whisper, and the seam we wanted turns its face to us politely. A treenalope peg cut with a taper is driven home in a new plank with a maul that knows how to end a sentence. The peg mushrooms, a wedge follows it in, and the blackskin steel ring chases the wedge flush. Not a nail to rust here. Weirwood can do the whole job if asked correctly. The plug gets paired with a sharp chisel. The shaving falls like the ribbon on a gift that no one will wrap again for 50 years. Mid-morning sends us to the foundry. Lean to 4 small iron, chain plates, strap hinges, a pintle for the rudder, cheeks for the yard tackle. The smith heats the strap to a red that admits to being read without boasting, bends it around a former, and quells it in a bath that smells like last year's barrel learned a new number. Hammer, anvil, the exact music that turns bar into shape. He lays the iron on the stone and sets a punch so bolt holes will be true. He refuses to foul what fire and the right hammer blow can teach to be round by itself. A man from the lighthouse boat comes up from the quay with a list folded to a narrow tongue. Oil, wick, cleaning chalk, a spare pendulum spring, and a new pane for a storm-broken sash on the keeper's house. He presses the list on the bench and a coin onto the small scale. The leaf weight says yes, the note on the chit says tonight, if wind allows. We load the kedge anchor that belongs to that boat, press a wedge in its stock, and set the oil tins in baskets with rope slings. A spare lamp glass rides in a cradle padded with old canvas, and a superstition that has failed to embarrass itself. If drowsiness visits, it will not hinder anything here. The list will pack itself in our hands. The kettle will go on worrying the pitch with no special supervision. We swing the mast into its paint steps and lay a first coat with a brush that does not shed its hair. Painters always look as if they have time to waste. They do not. Their brush rides the grain like a reed boat on a flood. Sags are hunted and flattened drips are wiped now, not confessed later. Under the keel, a boy rubs tallow on the ways fat on plank, where the launch will slide when the river and the foreman agree that today is the day. The wedges wear a number. The number tells the hands which to knock loose first, which to flatter last, and which to leave entirely alone until the hull and water exchange their long-planned courtesies. Noon. A kettle in a shed makes a briefcase for cabbage and buckwheat. We sit on timber, backs to sun, and use knives not for knives' sake, but because bread in winter hears steel and sits still. Words come in short chains, wine veered, pitch behaved, iron ready. Oil aboard not for eloquence, for order. A gull makes a sound like a hinge deciding to be a song. We let it be a song. Then the bench clears. Afternoon bends toward the quay. The lighthouse boat is a cutter, 2 hands and a coxswain, with a dory for the last 50 yards. When the light's rock says, no closer, we step aboard the cutter with the oil and the glass and the little crate of chalk for polishing prisms. The coxswain tests the halyard with his fist and looks out where the bay plane is a grey that comes in half-inch layers. He says, well, spare the back channel and step through the lee chop. He says it as if he were reading a warehouse label. We clear the timber heads and meet the first low push beyond the mole. The cutter rides its own plan, and the forestay groans a baritone that doesn't need us to hum. The city slides to our left. The great works square their shoulders as if portraits required of them certain standards. Ahead, the light white tower, iron gallery, lantern house that knows every wind by its first footfall waits on its rock with a small optimism. A bell tongue hangs at the gallery edge. Fog has not asked for it yet, but the clapper's rope wears its grip smooth. The keeper waits on the slip with a boat hook and a face that has arranged itself to be useful and therefore pleasant. He takes the forward painter and sets us into the fetch. With one push the way, a man sets a draw back into its carcass after mending a rail. The crate and the oil tins climb the stone steps in a chain of hands. The spare glass goes up like a newborn, carried by 3 uncles. Nothing knocks, nothing boasts. This is the etiquette of stones that do not forgive. Inside the service room, the air is warm with the courtesy of a small stove. A rack holds wicks rolled like tight scrolls. A cupboard keeps spare chimneys, ranked like bottles that forgot wine. On the bench lies the keeper's log, neat print, not a splash upon it. He opens to today. His pencil writes oil received, chimneys 3, wind west-northwest, sea low, passing coals to south. He writes it for himself, but also for the person he is not yet met who will, one day, read this page and decide how to set a handrail on a slick night. Up the stair, round and round tread, step, land until the lantern room reminds the world that glass can be a kind of law. The lens rings of prisms like quiet waterfalls waits under its hood. We do not touch the glass with rags that have opinions. The keeper lifts the hood, lays it aside, breathes once, and sets to with chamois and chalk. A smear becomes clear of thumbprint, becomes a story that will not be told again. The lamp font gets filled with oil that has never met dust. The wick, trimmed to a horseshoe, waits in a pan that knows how to catch mistakes. The clockwork sits under a brass cover. The keeper lifts the little door with fingers that learned patience from springs, not from sermons. He checks the escapement's tongue and smiles privately at its evenness. The weight line hangs down the hollow of the tower. Iron grains in a can, whispering about gravity in a dialect everybody understands. He lowers the weight a little to test the run, then locks it. The sun is not yet at its last rib. The light will go on when the horizon gives permission. If your eyelids grow heavy, let them. The lens will still be there, and the wick will not take offense. A man can doze in a light like this and wake to find nothing has grown impatient in his absence. We fit the new sash pane in the keeper's house with putty that will harden against wind and regret. The old shards go into a pail for tomorrow's cart. His wife sweeps twice where the first sweep left a sliver. She lets the broom write its soft conclusion, then pushes the pail with a foot to a corner where it cannot decide to talk in the dark. On the table, a samovar that came out on a boat a year ago makes the same respectful sound the kettles make upriver. Tea behaves like tea in all weather. Back in the lantern, the keeper checks the wick one last time. He lifts the glass chimney with 2 fingers, as if it could remember what fingers did last month and still be surprised. The match goes with its small show, then surrenders. The flame finds its shape. Then he lowers the chimney. He turns the key that lets the clock move. The lens begins to walk its circle, patient, always thinking about the future, but moving in the present. The first flash touches the water and makes a white stitch on grey cloth. Somewhere out there, a deckhand looks up and says nothing except to himself. He trims the wick a breath to stop a lip of smoke that thought it might become politics. Dusk is a lesson room. We carry the empty tins to the dory and set them upside down to remind the nose that these are hollow now. The coxswain rubs the painter over his palm and nods about something that only rope and one man can talk about together. The bell tongue knocks once in a fit of conscience when a swell slips under the rock, then thinks better of it and waits for real weather. A gull lands on the rail, arranges its feet as if the iron could admire shoes, looks sideways at the lens, and decides to expect neither praise nor injury. We drop away on the last easy line of light. The cutter puts its bow where bows belong. The city has already lit its low lamps along the quays. A signal ball falls on the tower by the harbour office to say the time to anyone who carries a chronometer worth the weight of its arrogance. Our chronometer is the keeper's pencil, the yard's whistle, the bell on the buoy, and the tea at the end of jobs that should be quietly proud. At the quay, the oil basket kisses the stones and stays, empty and useful. The scale on the bench weighs the signed shit with the weight that belongs to paper and trust. The buoy kicks shavings toward a sweep. The tar kettle lid has given up its work and sits warmer than the air, but cooler than it was. A cat walks the sill, believes in mice, and is not set straight by anyone with a worse worldview. We coil lines, not because a visitor might judge, but because tomorrow starts easier when a line lets itself out like a thought that knows the right verb already. The caulking irons go into a box, faces oiled, mouths clean, handles down. The mallet lies with its head at the same end of the tray every night of every year. The spoke shaves go blade up in a rack. The gauge rings collect in a drawer whose bottom is covered with sailcloth, so steel and oak can go to bed without hard feelings. The glass pane that we did not break on the way over goes into a crate for a man in the city who will discover he has one problem fewer than he feared. The yard grows blue and then deliberate. Someone slides the slip's grease cover over the ways because snow, even in a moderate mood, will take a foot of tallow for no reason at all. A hand checks the chalk line's nail and taps it a notch deeper so night won't teach it to wander. The brazier sighs. The pitch gives a last sweet ghost of smoke. The wind picks it up and carries it to the river, where men who tell stories will later say they smelled a ship being born and like the smell without wishing to fight about it. Find your own bench edge and let the day collect itself. On the river, a light turns slowly with no ambition beyond being seen. In the yard, a wedge that wouldn't listen this morning behaves now like an old friend who has decided to stay. The hands that did the work rinse in cold water, wipe on a rag, and put the rag where it will be found tomorrow. That is the whole philosophy of this part of the world. The fourth part. Night leaves the forest in slow handfuls. Frost loosens its grip on the bark of birch and larch, and a faint line of smoke tells where the charcoal men kept their promise to the pits until first light. The milers stand as black cones under a thin skin of snow, their turf jackets patched with last season's sod, their breath rising from tiny vents like animals asleep but listening. A rake's teeth glint where resin found them yesterday. A shovel leans in the post tool's profurity, but not proud. We begin with the damp cap. A man's boot heel presses the turf back, a hand draws a plug of clay, and the miler exhales a longer sigh. The rake lifts the crust a hand's width, the second man slides in a board, like a tongue to keep the whole from growing into a story. Steam rolls, sweet and torry, no flames. The pit was kept honest in the night, and so the wood inside has remembered to become what iron likes to eat. When the steam thins, they pull the boards, lift the jacket, and the cone opens into a low hill of black, the sticks inside now feather-light, ringing if tapped. The ends turn to soft ovals, where the larch mapped its own cells into carbon. Baskets wait with their rope slings. A boy tests one by setting it on a stump and pressing his palms to its rim always to palms, so the weight tells the truth. Charcoal goes in without drama, shovel and hand and shovel. A few pieces whisper apart and make black dust that will lie on faces by noon, on cuffs, on the first page of the day's ledger if care sleeps. A brush of birch twigs waits for that page. We will remember to use it. A sled track runs from the pits to the works, like a black seam stitched into a white sleeve. The runners sing on their own schedule. The driver stands with knees easy and a hand on the fork staff that minds a brake shoe. The horse wears a blanket under the collar to keep the charcoal's winter out of muscle. At the river bend a plank bridge to be level last month with wedges and frost, and we'll forget in spring. Today, it behaves. The sled's rope net holds the basket steady against the turn that always looks gentler than it is. The furnace stack rises ahead with its brick face holding the first warmth of the day. A wheel gives the air its instruction. Buckets lift, spill, lift. Spill their water weight turns a shaft that took oil before dawn, and the shaft tells the bellows what to do without a single raised voice. The bellows to large leather lungs framed in wood inhale and press, their iron link arms drawing a rhythm that a chest could copy and not grow tired. At the 2-year, wind becomes fires a lie, and the mouth of the furnace answers without theatrics, just a steady glow of work. All comes up in handcarts, small loads that a man can stop with a boot if a wheel forgets. The pieces are brown and red where the forest's thin earth held them, and grey where the wash ditch taught the clay to show the vein. On a plank table by the tunnel mouth, a foreman knocks the big lumps once or twice with a sledge, not to make chips for noise, only to find the fault lines and tell them to leave politely. Limestone waits in a shallow bin the flux that teaches slag to let go, and a boy with a scoop measures it as if this was soup, not stone. At the charging floor, the hatch opens like a lid on a kettle. To men set a crib of timber at the lip and slide the wheelbarrow up until its nose is inside the smell. Or first, then charcoal, then or again the scoop of limestone where a hand learned to put it. They do not heap high the furnace taught that lesson 3 winters ago with a cough and a sulk that wasted a day. The hatch closes. A man raps the handle with his knuckles and listens for the notes that mean seated. He hears it, and his shoulders lower a finger. Find the small comforts that make a long shift simple. A brush to keep dust off the ledger, a damp cloth over the lunch pail, a shovel standing blade down so the snow can't lie to it, a wedge under the bellow's tail to keep the chain off a splintered edge. In places like this, kindness is specific or it isn't kindness at all. By the casting floor, sand waits in a bed like a beach that learned a trade. A man pulls a strake, levels, pulls again, and checks the face with the back of his hand. Coarse sand for strength, a little finer over it, so the iron skin won't pock. Someone shows the boy the right way to mark the pig bed, spine down the middle for the runner, ribs branching off and curling a little so iron doesn't learn to race and forget to fill. He draws with a stick and then cuts with the edge of a flat board. The board's handle is smooth where hands taught it manners. Ribs get nicknames cat, dog, fox because men like to count with animals on nights when numbers get slippery. A whistle made from a filed spoon handle sings a short line. It means exactly what it meant yesterday. Be ready. The keeper at the hearth knocks the tap hole's clay plug once, twice, 3 times. The 3rd time the clay moves, the hole glows, then brightens. Then a line of iron, the color of anger, but without anger, walks outward to the south channel and lowers its head like a creature that has been trained well. Slag rides on top. Opal and green, the slagman uses a rake with a wooden shoe to draw it to the lip, where it can go to its own bed and cool into glass that will make roads smoother later. The iron runs along the ribs and sets each pig quiet. No shouting. The only sound next to the paw is the small dry hiss of sand doing what sand knows. You can leave your attention here for a time and not lose your place. The wheel will keep turning, the bellows will breathe, the pig bed will fill without borrowing your thoughts. When you return, the color will have shifted one shade toward what men can lift. The hammer shop keeps its own weather. Water slips under the wheel's paddles and pushes up a shaft that carries cams like big knuckles. The helm stands waiting, a long arm of oak with a head heavy enough to drive regret out of awe. The cams lift the tail of the helve, one after another, and let it fall. The hammer says yes, yes, yes in a voice that will lull a child or steady a man who forgot he knew how to stand still. The finery fire sits shallow behind a breastwork of brick. Pig iron goes in air, worries it. A refiner with a bar stirs slow, turns, lifts, and watches the sparks speak. Long white tails mean carbon. If his short red says wait. He knows the difference without knowing the names. He raises a bull, dripping into the world, and shepherds it under the hammer, where it will learn to be a bloom. The hammer's face is dressed clean. The anvil block below has seen 3 generations of heads and holds no grudges. To strikers catch the bloom with long tongs, lift and set, the helve falls, the bloom flattens. Turns slag spits to the floor and freezes into glassy flakes that a broom will carry later to the path outside, where it will crunch under boots and mean nothing. The bloom elongates into a bar that looks like a path someone drew while thinking of something else, but ultimately meant it. The bar goes back to the fire, comes back to the hammer, back and forth until its square faces its own future. Beside the hammer, a straightening bench with dogs and wedges waits 4 bars to call to the color that refuses mischief. A man runs his eye along a bar, lifts the far end with 2 fingers, sets a wedge, steps on it once, and the bar decides to be honest. He scratches the works mark with a chisel at the end small, neat, then hefts the bar onto a rack where a boy will later tie 10 in a bundle with a strip of rawhide. Rawhide shrinks when it dries, bundles hold without argument. Noon noses in on smoke and bread. Kvass sits in a jug with a string tied near the neck for wet fingers. The string keeps the glass from slipping when a hand has learned to live in steam. Onion, a heel of black bread, a spoon of salt. Someone tells the story of a bear that turned out to be a man in a fur coat under a hayrick. And one laughs. The story isn't told to win. It's told to call the room back to itself. Men nod and return to the doors, where air, iron, and water share duties with temper and habit. At the slip mill, the wheel drives a different dream. Rollers take a bar and turn it round the way a river rounds a stone, only quicker. Then the slitter, a wheel with sharp teeth, cuts the bar into rods like broom straw 4 nails. The noise is less than you think, because wood and water absorb more than men prefer to honor with words. Rods spill into a cradle, tilt into a trough, and rest in bundles that will walk to a nailer's bench this afternoon and learn to be points and heads that persuade wood to hold hands with wood. Across the yard, a small stamp press keeps the least dramatic promise of the day. Bar ends meet a die that bites a shallow emblem, the work's name bent into 2 letters, a crown that means less now than it will later, a date that tells inspectors what to be proud about. The press does its gentle push. The bar leaves the date behind the way a man leaves his name or a tool he doesn't want to lose. On the scale in the warehouse, leaf weights and chains count without arithmetic. A clerk touches the beam's pointer with one nail until it stops, then writes in a hand that soldiers envy and poets borrow when they learn to get paid 4 words. Bars, 3 bundles sheet, 1 rods, 2. He rolls a drop of wax onto a tag, presses the work seal, ties the tag to the rawhide with a knot that a wet glove can undo without teaching new language to the old. Beside him, a girl copies the same lines into a thin book that will follow the cart tomorrow. Her letters sit straight a smudge, thinks about being a smudge and decides against it under the brush. The day deepens. The furnace keeper throws in a scoop of limestone where a darker thread snuck through the charge and tried to thicken the slag. The thread melts and forgets its opinion. On the casting floor, the pig's cool enough to move with tongs. Each gets a swift knock to break the runner. The runner goes back in as feed to finish a pocket. Nothing wastes itself here, unless it is air, and no one owns that. You might blink longer in a place like this and still not miss anything that can't be caught in the next cycle. Wheel, blow, melt, tap, pour, hammer, turn. Quench none of these, mind that people are made of different materials than iron is. A cart from the smithy arrives, 4 shoes, tire bars, and a strip for a plough. The smith fingers the bar edge and smiles in his beard at the straightness. He tests a shoe blank against a wheel hoop, nods once, and sets a copper ring on the scale pan. The leaf weight says the price fits. He walks away with 3 questions fewer than he brought. The yard girl chalks a line on the plank that says which way the cart went for anyone who forgot where they were looking when someone called their name. Outside the shop, the slag heap looks like frozen water at dusk. Children climb it when no one tells them not to, and learn a lesson about balance that is quicker and kinder than the ones that come later in rooms with benches. A path runs past the heap to the river, where a raft is tied with a rope the thickness of a wrist. 2 men roll a pig to the edge by pushing with their handspikes on a low-wheeled dolly. The pig drops into straw, the straw into a net, the net into understanding. A stamp on its nose will tell someone far away who melted it and who laid it in sand. The bellows chain needs oil. A man with a can the size of a fist walks the length of the beam, touches each pin, and listens for relief. He speaks to the links as if they had language. Maybe they do. Behind him, a tall rack gives the kind of order that refuses speeches, chisels edge to tongs, by throat size flatters and fullers face up hardy in its whole swage blocks, sitting heavy like furniture that finally found the corner it wanted. Toward end of shift, the furnace's heart eases a notch. The keeper holds a bar to the 2-year mouth and knows the color by his knuckles. He muds the tap, packs it with the same force every day, no harder, no softer, and smooths the face with a wet stick. Figure, face in work, garment, ground. He adds a narrow red at the lip line and the idea of brown under the lower lid. The eyes decide to look, then look down. He writes tiny letters in the corner, not a signature, a confession that hands were here. A brother lays the panel under a black cloth, so winter sun will not teach you to crack with a joke. In the candle room, a small pan of black pigment and turpentine lives in a corner where the maker marks the bottoms of finished bundles with a shop sign, to short strokes and a cross and a dot. The cross is not a sermon, it is how the pantry later knows which bundle is last in, which first out. He lays the bundles in a chest, slips a paper on top with the day, sets a flat stone so mice admit they have better rooms in which to conduct their business. Bell day reaches its heart. The molds stand like big bread loaves dragged from earth. Wedges come out, the iron bands get loosened. The founder knocks the mold with the wooden mallet the way a physician might knock a knee. It answers as a thing with gravity should. They lift the coat out a half by rope and prayer in the correct proportions. Straw falls, steam comes, clay opens. The shape inside shows metal under flour. They chip the last loam away with blunt chisels. The bell dark, soft looking, heavy like an oath you plan to keep, leans out of the pit on its cradle and meets the world. Chisels dress the sound bow, a scraper kisses a casting seam. A file touches a line and says no, not here. The founder taps the lip with a small hammer. The bell answers in a voice too low to be a note yet, a promise more than a song. They roll it to the porch and let winter take the heat without grabbing it. Ice smells. Tintin pretends it is deaf. Ropes and a beam make a team that does not complain. The bell climbs the tower slow, a hand on every line, a word for every hand. The headstock takes the straps, pins drive home, keys wedge right, not hard. The clapper hangs from a strap that knows its life, leather under iron to keep the torque honest. A man at the belfry rail checks the wheel, and rope the thumb notch on the rim sits where a glove will find it when not thinking. He spits in his palm more for a habit than for grip, touches the rope, and draws a half stroke. The bell speaks. First sound, short. Second, longer. Third, the room around us notices that air can be taught a new discipline without raising fear. The tone is warm, not metallic, and carries a line like a path that knows where it is going even in snow. A man touches his ear, laughs without showing teeth, and nods. He shaves the inside of the bell with a little chisel to bite sand pulls again. Now the low comes up straight, overtones sit where they should. They leave the bell to find the whole hour on its own later. If you fade a little while the bell talks to the air, you will not miss the lesson. Bells are generous. They remember what they said and say it again when asked, without irony. Dusk folds the shop windows into amber. The icon panel, first passage dry, receives lines for the faces. A thin brush charged with brown-red draws pupils. The corner of a mouth, the line under the chin where life rests. A small dot of white goes at the corner of each eye. It is the smallest stroke and feels the most like permission. The master cleans the brush with his breath and water in a shell. He lays paper over the panel and writes notes. 2 more lights here. Cool shadow on jaw. Gold on border to be burnished after evening office. He closes the box. Candles gather on a table near the door with a small brass pan of sand. A boy stands each candle base in sand, one by one, until a tray's full. He checks heights with a narrow stick with a notch. The even top row is air pride. He carries the tray to the chapel where lamp glasses wait. He leaves space for the wine's way and for a sleeve to pass harmlessly. He knows what sleeves do to candle trays when trays forget corridors are narrow. In the kitchen, bread wakes the room a second time. Loaves come out, a brush of water makes their crusts listen, a cloth goes over to make steam turn to kindness. A pot that has simmered since noon lets itself be finished. Buckwheat releases starch with no complaint. Mushrooms did their work. Onions admit they were always going to. Bowls line up without pomp. The bell for refectory is not the new bell. It is a small brass plate on a handle tapped with a spoon. The spoon knows exactly where to touch the plate to get a friend's voice. Evening service. Lamps under the icons learn their wicks. The new candle smoke tastes like honey and wood and thinks about making soot, and then, because a hand trimmed the wick properly, decides against it. The big bell speaks the hour with a patience that feels like a stone, and the little bells braid a pattern around it. The room hears, and the snow outside hears what rooms hear, softer. After, the workshops close the way good rooms close. Glue pot gets a lid, brushes lie flat, so the hairs don't learn to bend. Pigments close, eggshells go to a dish scraper, and plain go edge up. The ads gets a leather sock. Panels lie on racks like sleeping boards on a ship when weather is kind. The candle pots water gets poured. Wicks hang, the yolks lean where yolks always lean. In the bell shed, the pit gets covered against snow. Someone leans the pattern board on its peg, chalk face inside. The last hands in the tower touch the rope and leave it hanging straight. No twist to teach tomorrow. The bell breathes cold and throws it back as calm. On the stair, boots learn to step on the 5th tread and the 8th tread to avoid the hollows made by men who never learn to vary their days. There is a lamp on a hook halfway down. Its glass is clean because the lamplighter takes pride in glass. The hook's throat is wrapped in twine, so metal won't bite glass. This saved one chimney in autumn and now saves all chimneys as if by law. The gate shuts, but not with a slam. The bar drops the latch, says its small syllable. Snow takes the prints and makes them into a lesson for morning. A fox goes along the fence line and does not decide anything important. The river behind the wall flows under ice with the same sound it had in summer, only lower, as if it were talking across a table and not over a yard. If you doze now, the gesso will not crack in protest, and the bell will not go mute. It will simply wait and say its mind when the hour asks. The rooms here like to be remembered, but they do not require witnesses. The 10th part. Morning begins inland, where the steppe moves in slow shoulders under the wind and carts wake the road without fuss. By the time the wagons reach the city edge, the day has already learned the smell of grain dry, green at the fringe, warm in the middle as if summer kept a pocket here. The customs post opens its book and lets the wheels roll past the bar. A boy jumps down to knock mud from a hub with a stick, not from pride, from habit. The first scale sits just inside the yard, its wooden platform rubbed smooth by years of sacks that remember their corners. Leaf weights lie in a row like sleeping fish. The pointer finds its mark. A clerk writes with a pen that knows how to drink ink without making a scene. He sands the figures and blows once a thin cloud goes no farther than his sleeve. The cleaning shed keeps the air busy. A fanning mill stands with its belly open crank, fan box, sieves stacked from coarse to fine. A man feeds grain from a hopper with a hand that can judge speed without looking. The crank turns, wind lifts chaff, and lets weight fall where weight belongs. Dust rises and finds the windows, where rags made from shirts keep their promise in the corners. A girl swaps the lower screen for one finer, taps the frame with a knife hilt until the rattle says seated. Grain runs again. The loudest things here are not loud. The brush edge on a chute, the scrape of a wooden scoop against the plank, the patient rhythm of the fan. Sacks learn their shape on a trestle. Jute waits in a bale that once crossed a sea to be useful here. A bench holds needles big as a man's palm and twine wax to remember its twist. A woman lifts a sack mouth to her knee, throws a bite of twine, sends the needle under and over, locks with a little half hitch. She does without naming it. Her fingers know which stitch keeps mice out and grain in. A boy stamps a mark on the sack's cheek with a pad and a stencil. Where from? Where to? What lot? The ink says. What paper will say again? That this sack belongs to a line of sacks and they all know where to walk. You can loosen your attention in this room. The fan will keep its wind, the sieves will sort, the needle will go in and out and leave a scene that looks like sanity. A sample spear, a long tube with a slit, and the lever slides into the top of a sack. The clerk twists, draws the spear, and catches a stream of grain in a tin. He rubs a kernel between thumb and forefinger. He bites one a quick, unromantic test that lives between tooth and sense. Dry enough. He scatters a pinch on the table and listens to how quickly it stops rolling. On a bad day, grain clings to boards and wants to be a paste. On a good day, it behaves like the inside of a drum played politely. Today is a good day. Outside, the key takes the sun on the side of its stones. Odysseus Mole throws a long arm into the water, making a room 4 holes to breathe, without learning new ideas from a swell. Lighters press their faces to the hall fenders. Rope mats lie underfoot where boards forgot to forgive glass bits from last week. A derrick on a coaster leans, as if listening. Its tackle hangs with the authority of rope that has never been asked to lie. The lighterman's hook blunt, wide, confident waits on a rail. Men walk in pairs under sacks, shoulders squared by pads of folded felt. They do not run. Grain prefers men who do not run. A tallyman sits on a keg with his board and chalk. He counts in fives because fingers insisted long before chalk did. 1, 2, 3, 4. Door. He draws a gate mark for 5 with a flick that has learned when to be small. Every so often, he tips his board to shake dust into a barrel so numbers will sit clear. A poor cat learns to keep its tail off the chalk. The cat sleeps anyway. Chalk and cats have their own treaty. The first lighter takes a full breath and asks for more. Under the hatch, a wooden chute guides sacks to a hand on the other side. The man there has a habit of lowering 3 inches before the drop to keep seams from learning shock. A wedge here, a map there. Everything is foreseen, not announced. A barrel of water sits against the hatch. Combing a dipper waits. Men drink without discussing thirst. A hand rubs a knot with tallow and goes on. The knot would have behaved without the rub keeps it from learning pride. Across the harbour a larger ship shows her midships derrick and a single line of laundry along the after rail shirts, a towel that has seen better households. The mate on the bridge wing raises binoculars and lowers them. Nothing changes. He lowers the gangway to the mole without letting it bank. On deck, a small winch rattles a chain white grease at its collar, a handle that knows when to be enough. The lighter will come when the lighter is ready. Impatience here, a toy that breaks early. Back on the quay, a customs man rolls a red wafer between his fingers to soften it, then presses his stamp into the warm face. He kisses the cord on a hatchboard with wax, so a night breeze can't invent a thief. The stamp sign shows a double-headed bird that's done this job longer than any man alive. The bird has not learned to boast. The customs man lifts his hat to a woman carrying a basket of bread rings strung on a cord. He takes one. He works better 4 or 5 minutes after the salt touches his mouth. Wine from the sea turns ropes into soft microphones. The quay hears everything. Gull complaints like bent hinges, the dry hiss of wheat settling in a sack wheels. Under a cart, a dog deciding not to bark. A lamp glass from last winter's storm hangs in the shed. As a spare, someone rubs it with a cloth that does not shed lint. Nobody says for luck. They say we will need it someday, which is the same idea taught to speak plainly. A foreman at the shed door lifts a hand and the yard listens. He reads the tide on stone, where lines were cut in peacetime and will still be cut in storm. Not yet for deep draft. Lighters first, coasters after. Then the outbound Marseille today, Trieste tomorrow, Liverpool when the wind approves. He makes a small mark under the lowest line with a chalk stone, then wipes it off with a thumb, so anyone who needs to see the line will see the line, not his mark. At noon, shade gathers under the awnings. A kettle sits on an iron trivet over a pan of coals and breathes a thin, consistent breath. Cups of enamel wait. A woman from the counting house reads numbers aloud to a clerk. Sacks, lots, weights that mattered at the yard and matter differently here. She has a string on which she keeps tags bitten off the sack's ties. Every tag wears the same hole and the same tired ink. The string will tell a story later when someone asks where a bundle went when no eyes followed. For now, it is a necklace of proofs. You can drift a bit under this awning. The rope will not forget its knot. The chalk will not rewrite itself. The sea has its own timetable not written in the station master's book, but it keeps time all the same. The first lighter noses out. Oars take slow bites. The stern hand steering with a long sweep, if drawing a line for a child to copy. Out by the ship, a fender that once was a rope, and then a cork tree's argument about age takes the contact and forgets it. The derrick line goes down. The hook finds the sling under the sack's bellies, and one lift later they are aboard. The mate calls figures without raising his voice. The tallyman on the lighter answers in his own chalk. 2 rooms of numbers meet without trying to win. On deck, a boatswain sends sacks down a chute into the hold, where a man with a rake walks them into corners. He does not poke, he redraws surfaces, so weight will lie where weight will not decide to move at sea. A hatchboard with a cracked corner earns a strip of canvas nailed true, not to hide, to govern. The carpenter trims the canvas with a knife that has no patience for showing off. When the second lighter empties, a breeze turns from the mole and the water darkens a shade, not enough to make promises. Boys push a barrow stacked with rope mats back toward the shed, their elbows remember to stay in. A clerk from the agent's office arrives with a sheaf of papers under a leather strap, bills of lading. He sets them on the scale pan by mistake and smiles at himself, then sets them on the bench and takes a pencil with a brass cap. He writes names with care, counts sacks twice, and lets a blotter kiss the wet words. The captain signs, not as an act of theatre, but as a man who has spent a life looking after lines. Wax comes out, a stamp presses, and the paper carries weight that grain alone cannot carry. Up on the hill, the big clock over the exchange shifts its hand. Bells in the city answer, without asking if ships keep the same hour. Every instrument has its own language. Down here, the useful languages are palm, rope, chalk, and the weight of a shoulder under a sack. A man ties a figure 8 in a line and leaves enough tail to teach tomorrow how to undo it. Another rubs a splinter out of a fender board with a shard of glass, then tosses the shard into a barrel that knows what to do with dangerous beauties. Afternoon introduces a new rhythm. Carts come slower. Lightermen strike a steady trot between ship and wall, and the shed's fan finds a lower key. In the back corner, a scale for moisture tin dish, coal flame. A little copper lid dries a sample and tells a clerk what weight will be returned by the sea before Marcel has a chance to argue. He writes a percentage with a pencil that nearly needs sharpening and decides to sharpen later. The pencil will be truer for being humbled. A visitor from an insurance office watches the key with a face that practices not being a face. He notes the mats under the sacks, the fenders at the coamings, the man with the rake in the hold. He glances at the wind and the chimney smoke and decides not to be nervous. He writes ordinary care good in a pocket book that cares less for adjectives than for the line about no open flame, which he underlines because a boy once set a match to a pipe on this quay and has not been invited back. Toward evening the harbour shows its metal, buoys lift and settle, their iron eyes polished by rope. The Malay lamps stand up under glass a green and a red call and response along the channel. A keeper at the end light trims a wick and sets the glass down without fingerprints and without deserving applause. The light looks the same before and after. That is the right kind of success. The last sacks for the day goods to the belly of the ship by lantern light held not in fists but on hooks. Shadows misbehave around lanterns. Hooks keep them in their lane. The mate checks the hatch-list chalk marks on a blackboard, then nods to the carpenter to set the boards and dog them with iron. Tarpauling goes over. Battens follow. Wedges remember humility. The boatswain says enough and means it. The rope coils by the bits with their tails tucked under like sleeping animals. A man straightens one coil because one day somebody failed to do that, and a lad took a fall that took a week from his life. The coil will be right until morning now. If you let your head nod here, numbers will keep their truth and the sea will keep the edge of the mole without mischief. The paper is signed, the sacks are counted, the knots were asked properly and answered properly. The office on the quay closes itself. The clerk kinds the pencils by length, points covered by little corks. He screws the cap onto the inkwell and wipes the threads with his sleeve, because yesterday he did not, and he learned the difference. He takes the brass key from the hook, locks the top drawer where bills sleep, and sets the key on a nail driven for that purpose. He lays the blotter over the last line and closes the book. The book is heavy, and heaviness here is not a complaint. On the mole, a watchman walks, a ring of keys on his belt, a staff in his hand with a little clock box that will later tell the office that he touched each station at the hour. He touches the station and hears the spring give back a tiny answer. He does not smile, he trusts springs because he has seen fewer betrayals by metal than by men. He leans a hand against the warm stone of the lamp base. The lamp hums its own small philosophy. Trimmed wicks, clean glass, regular oil. Night lifts from the water and sits where it pleases. A last lighter makes for the slip. Oars quiet, men quieter. On the coasting ship, a bell strikes 8, then sits as if considering which number to like best. The captain reads the barometer and decides to sleep one layer down. In the shed, the fan's crank rests with the handle pointing where the man will want it in the morning, half to the right, so he can take it without rolling the first turn backward. This small mercy has prevented arguments nobody hears about. Back in the yard, the cleaning crew sweeps the aisle between the sacks like a road that wants to be found at dawn. A broom stands bristles up. The sample spear hangs with its slit closed and the lever relaxed, point down so nobody with lively knees learns its language by surprise. A bucket of water sits for the night, so doesn't think about settling. A cat takes a position on the bale that sees most mice and least wind. Cats have reasons. We do not ask them to publish. A small tug coughs on a line of smoke outside the entrance and then decides to keep its counsel. The mole light rotates on its own slow thought. Farther along, another lamp throws a coin of green on the water. Sacks down in the hold, decide to become part of a ship's story instead of a yard's. Ropes dry, patience dries, dust drops, flags sleep, and the ink in the ledger thinks about being solid. Morning will rebuild the noise, but for now the harbour learns its sleep. The men's shoulders remember weight and forget complaint. Somewhere up the street a samovar will practice its quiet suggestion, and bread will be a square hand can rely on. Down here, a chalkboard leans against a wall with a list that will not be wrong at breakfast. The sea moves against the stones with the same measured hand as a man stroking a horse after a shift. The city listens without pretending to be surprised. The 11th part. For the city has quite decided on its colour. The hill south of it has already chosen slate and pale brass. Frost clings to the rail of the stair, a key turns in a lock that has learned to move without throat clearing. Inside the round room, air keeps last night's cool metal holds it longer. The dome's shutters sit like eyelids. On the pier a stone column that does not touch the floor, so footsteps won't teach it opinions. The transit instrument waits. Twin circles, brass polished by rags that never shed a telescope, with micrometer wires like hairlines, a bubble level with its green eye, a mercury basin with a glass roof, a lamp that will not be called upon yet, but stands as if it were already doing its duty. We begin by letting the sky in. The rope on the shutter answers the hand with a weight that reminds anyone holding it why counterweights were invented. Boards slide, the slit opens, the first faint stripe of day becomes a rule across which stars will quit one by one. The observer checks the spirit levels, two bubbles that speak in syllables of tilt. He brings them to the center with a breath and a touch on the foot screw, left then right, never hunting the same error twice. A small brush takes dust from the micrometer box, the cover clicks and forgets its vanity. The sidereal clock in the corner has kept its own night. Its brass pendulum stands tall behind glass, the pallet stones kiss the escape wheel. A rhythm no one in this room has permission to disturb. A louver by the case keeps drafts honest. The clock's face has two minds. The long hand that walks a minute of star time, and the little one that believes in hours, the way sailors believe in harbours. On a low table, a chronometer sits in its gimbals in a box. Like a chest for a minor treasure, its balance will shortens winter with each swing. The assistant winds both clocks with a key that has been part of the place longer than any man in it. When the clicks stop, he listens for the beat to return to exactly what it was, and it does. The transit circle's collimation is checked before anyone trusts the numbers that pay for brick and lamps. A target on the far wall, a dot on a plate, whose position was argued with care in a summer nobody talks about now, takes the wire. The micrometer turns until the dot and the wire make one thought. He notes the reading. Then the telescope reverses in its ease. Up becomes down and left becomes right. And he repeats the measure. The mean of two answers that do not dare to disagree is the one the book receives. He writes in a hand that denies flourishes, tiny, plain, the way maps speak when they are maps and not opinions. Down in the passage, a small chronograph drum wakes. A lamp soot blackens its paper. A stylus, moved by a clock contact, will tick a dot every second. A second stylus, moved by a finger on a telegraph key, will draw an extra dash when the observer says now to a star. Wires run along the wall like thoughts that aren't ashamed of being visible. The assistant rubs one contact with a square of leather sparks, like to be discouraged early in the day. He sets the drum turning with a belt over a pulley. Not fast, just enough to keep seconds from piling up like dishes. If your attention slides here, no instrument will sulk. Brass will hold its geometry, the bubble will return to center, the clock will keep reserving the same seconds for the same stars, whether eyes attend or not. The first target of the morning is not a star, but its double. A reflex in mercury, a basin under glass, holds the calm surface. The telescope looks down, sees the bubble levels world reversed, and checks itself as a barber checks a cheek. The micrometer reads a thumb notes, the book admits it. Then the real work, a bright star that still lingers where night folds away, Capella or Aldebaran, depending on season, moves toward the wire. The micrometer screws split the field into equal strips The eye finds the center. The hand rests on the key that will call a dash down the paper, one floor below. When the star touches each wire, a pulse runs to the drum. The observer counts inside his ribs 1, 2, 3 and lets the stylus record what fingers already know. He does not chase perfection. With wrist, perfection arrives by patience with screws. He speaks once, repeats at the 10th, and the assistant notes the instruction without signaling back. In rooms like this, echo is discouraged. Between transits, the lamp at the back of the reticle earns a wipe of the chimneys. Soot fixed yesterday cannot learn new sins today if glass denies it the chance. A needle warms under a breath and trims the wick to a shoulder that won't tunnel. The lamp takes low oil now and will take Kinder oil tonight. Every choice here is small and none of them are free. In the library across the corridor, star lists wait inside calf covers. The winter volume stands open on a reading cradle. Columns with names and numbers that look like recipes for a quiet kind of bread right ascension, declination, magnitude. A pencil with a hard lead lays a tick beside each star that the air will allow this morning. Clouds over the gulf make their own decisions. The list adjusts gracefully. On the sill, a frost fern begins to shrug into water. A cloth lies ready to scold it without drama when it drops. By the time the city's squares pick up their own color, the room here holds its own constant. The eye has done its quota of nows. The assistant opens the book of reductions. The difference between sidereal and mean time. The equation of the instrument's small moods. The latitude that makes lines lean. And the corrections for refraction that all honest glass must admit. He lays aside rule beside the table not to impress anyone. It helps a brain that has decided to be patient, not proud. The arithmetic comes off the pencil as if kind. Errors confess early because neatness makes them ashamed. Down the hill, the telegraph sits with its own small storm of clicks. A wire from the observatory joins the city's nervous system, near junction under a tin cap. At 11:57 by mean time, a messenger goes for a key in a teak box and places it beside the sounder. He rolls the sleeve of his left wrist one turn, because he will do something with that hand in a minute, and sleeves that hesitate cause trouble. The observatory will send 4 dots, and the stop the Admiralty office will nod. Kronstadt's post will finger its own relay, and at noon a ball above the quay will drop along a mast and tell the harbour that all the watches have somewhere reliable to point. Back at the meridian, a quick check of the clock against the zenith tube, the little telescope that claims one narrow slice of sky and refuses all others, reminds the room that time here is not made by men, only pointed to. The bubble sits where it should. The star does not. The micrometer helps them agree. A line in a small column becomes sure of itself. The observer sets the sidereal clock signal arm to close once on the next minute and press the line that runs to the chronograph. He calls down the stair, minute arm ready. The answer returns as a tiny tremor in the paper trace. No need for voices where wire can carry courtesy. If your mind slides toward tea for a moment, you will not knock anything over. The room keeps its politeness, and star and wire will meet without offense, being watched with imperfect intensity. The noon signal is a whole city's quiet breath landing together. At the crest of the hour, a contact closes. Current runs the relay at Admiralty. Clicks. A boy at Kronstadt looks up involuntarily. Though he knows the rope will be fine, the ball falls, straight, deliberate, and 100 decks make the same small adjustment of fingers and crowns. A few late pockets on Nevsky pull their watches and feel the assurance that a piece of spring steel and 2 tiny screws are once again exactly in grace with the sky. No trumpet announces this. People raise their heads the way they do when a snowflake lands on a cheek, surprised, unsurprised, thankful they remembered to notice. Afternoon, the astrograph room asks for its attention. The big tube sits on a separate pier, away from footsteps. Its lens a square larger than a plate set with care. Plates live in a safe drawer glass with a film of emulsion that keeps its temper, if men keep theirs cut to size and brushed free of what cotton left behind. In the dark room, a red lamp lifts a small room from being blind. Chemicals stand in jars with labels written clear. Developer, stop, hypo. The developer smells like work done long ago and done right. He rocks the tray. Images from a patch of sky begin as if shy dots become a grain of salt scattered in a pattern not made by anyone here. He breathes steady and waits for the right grey. He slips the plate to the stop, then to the hypo, where silver forgives the past and commits to the future. On a copy stand, a measuring machine carries a microscope along crosshairs and speaks in 20ths of a millimeter. The plate, dried and dusted with a camel hair brush, lies under it. Each star that marks its place receives a pair of numbers whispered into the book. The air in this room knows not to move. When someone leans in, even breath can teach error, if it is theatrical. The clerk turns the micrometer screw with 2 fingers, not 3, and naps his thumb on the table when it forgets to be humble. The catalogue grows, columns align. A light line of blue pencil separates nights, so pages will not bleed into one another 3 winters hence, when a different hand comes to this table to say, did they really see it the same? And finds that yes, they did. The book accepts a smudge on the lower right glove wall. Not dirt because men live here. It denies blotches because ink has a job, and this is not it. Outside, carts sigh on the hill road. The dome has found its noon-tone pigeons. Remember to go around it and not over it. A boy carries a tin pail from the kitchen up the stair and sets it beside the stove in the transit room. He does not look through the instrument, because boys who look through instruments without being invited often become men who forget to ask before touching things. He has learned that watching hands is the same as watching stars, only nearer. He watches the older man steady the mercury with a breath, and does not think that the old man is proud. He thinks the old man is careful, which is better. If your head lowers and lifts here, you won't need to apologize to any screw or lens. The plates will still be wet where they should be. The clock will not have resented your trust in it. Late afternoon gives the collimator a second chance to gossip. It declines. The levels bubble has grown sulking cold. As old bubbles do, a warm thumb persuades it back. The observer reverses the instrument in its bearings once more for good manners. He draws the shutters together a hand. The slit narrows. The room warms a ½ degree. He notes the temperature in the margin, because brass nudges itself when air does. The pages of the log absorb the number without commentary. In the basement, the battery room keeps a quiet the rest of the building admires. Glass cells stand in ranks, acid still, plates clean. A boy with a bone-handled hydrometer draws a little of the liquid into the glass tube, reads the float, and puts it back without letting a drop consider anything beyond its life. He writes a number on a slate and hangs the slate back where slates live. He wipes the tube with a rag that he hangs in the same place every day, because rags, when they know where to sleep, behave better. The men step outside for 3 minutes and look at the city like men who stepped away from a lathe do, more with the skin than with the eyes. A carriage goes over a bridge. The iron rails remember and replay the wheel's sentence in a lower key. From out on the Gulf, one report from a signal gun reaches here a little after the air looks like it ought to have carried it already. Sound and light never lived by the same rules. They turn back inside, not because it is cold, but because the room in there makes a better argument for how to spend an hour. Evening brings lamps, then brings the practice of not being stingy with their trimming. The chronograph drum receives a fresh skin of soot. The stylus gets cleaned with a strip of newspaper twisted to a wick. The field wires are checked with a test spark and refuse to notice. The assistant sets the telegraph key onto bits of leather so the table won't growl to the pier when fingers get eager. He writes crunch tap ready on a card and slides it into a slot he made with a knife in the front edge of the desk long ago. Cards could sit there and behave. The night watch opens the shutters again when the sky proposes it. Stars enter, each on its own appointment. The observer's voice is even once every few minutes. A star's name turned to a syllable the assistant understands as a page number. The assistant's pencil marks where ink will speak later. The room breathes. The clock's beat learns to be half furniture, half metronome for a pulse beyond any man here. The cold makes brass earnest and men careful. The bubble resigns itself to the middle. The wire takes star after star, and the drum takes down their touchings. and makes them part of a black spiral a child would love if he could be made to listen to such small music. When the last planned transit kisses the last wire, they do not declare a finish. They sit a little while in a room that has decided for itself, at once quiet. Then the observer clicks the lamp down to a memory, and the assistant rolls the drum off, fixes the smoke paper in a frame, and draws a thin red line with a straight edge through the dots the clock left. He marks every 10th second with a smaller sign. He writes in the corner, in letters that only a man who has labored to keep them small can write, date, instrument, observer, assistant, barometer, thermometer, wind. He hangs the paper on a string across a shelf and goes to wash his hands in water that smells faintly of metal. The dome closes into motions, rope, and then the other rope. The slit becomes a line, then a seam, then the idea of a seam. A latch finds its seat without needing to announce its education. The telescope's dew cap slides over the lens with a sound like a new book being opened a finger's width and then surrendered. A cloth goes over the micrometer box, another over the mercury. A brush stands bristles up. A pencil returns to its shelf, not on top of the log, but beside it, because last winter someone taught a pencil how to fall. On the hill path down, the city looks like a chart that cannot be folded wrong. Far away, a clock face over the Admiralty reflects a lamp long after the lamp is no longer necessary. The ball rope at Kronstadt has been hauled back up and belayed. Somewhere a boatswain puts his watch in a bag of flannel and forgets about it for a week because he no longer needs to think about it. Somewhere else, in a small room where a stove keeps its embers, a boy holds a plate of glass to a candle and discovers that breath makes fog and fog makes light larger, and that knowledge feels like a tool he is allowed to keep. You can let the story idle here and it will not run off. Instruments have understood for a long time how to keep their ground when men are thinking of tea, gloves, or the small ache in a wrist. The stars will be where they said they would be tomorrow. The pendulum will forgive a minute and not infer character from it. The book will still have its margins. The 12th part. Dawn lays a thin pewter skin over the canal, and the lockhouse windows hold small ovals of light the way pockets hold coins for a day that has not yet begun to spend. Frost sits on the balance beams like powdered chalk, and the iron straps along the gate leaves keep their own counsel until a hand warms them. A gauge board on the stone key black, with white marks at the cubit and half-weights to say whether the lake has slept high or low. Somewhere to the east, Lodogar thinks in slow breaths. Here, the lockkeeper's kettle says something quieter and more useful. We start by reading the night. The keeper lifts the gauge rod from its notch and slides it down at the key face, shoulder easy, thumb on the edge to feel when wood meets the true zero under the scum. He calls the number in a voice that does not need to carry, 2 hands below the white. The boy at the desk looks it into the narrow book of mornings and looks up to find the same light as yesterday coming through the same paints. On the beam above the desk, a nail carries 3 tags, lake, upper pound, lower. He moves the lower tag 1 hole and leaves the others where they were. No speeches. The gates know what tone to use when numbers look like this. Ice holds the pound as if it had rights. Men mark a grid with soot string snap across the sheet, and then walk the lines with ice saws that have learned to listen. A saw teeds in, finds the tempo, and the blade begins to write a low sentence in water that cannot decide if it wants to be water today. At the corners of each cut, an ice chisel teaches the angles to agree. A bar through the cut gives to men a handle they heave, not with rage, with mathematics, and the slab rises and slides under the main flow to live there harmless. When the narrow dark lane reaches the coin where the gate leaf seals, a man in a wool cap checks the heel post with his glove, nods, and clears the last lip. Puddle clay in the hollow under the gate should keep its modesty. They do not disturb it. The lead along the mitre line pointed upstream like hands in prayer must be clean, or the day will be longer than it deserves to be. On the coping stones, cleats and bollards wait with their shoulders bare. A coil of line sits with its tail tucked like a good dog, The keeper reaches into the paddle gear locker and frees a canvas cover from its hooks. Under it, rack and pinion teeth sit greased and untalkative. The paddle and iron gatelet sunk into the leaf answers to the shaft through that rack. He works the handwheel half a turn to weight grease, and then sets it back where he found it. The habit saves effort later, effort saved now makes room for patience where it belongs. If your attention drifts with the steam from the kettle, nothing will sulk. Saw teeth will keep their rhythm, gauge marks will remain where a hand left them. The lake will continue to think in inches and hours. Upstream, a pair of barges lie with their bows, under quilts of canvas and hoarfrost. Their skippers have the faces of men who have been awake 4 years at a time and learned to be gentle about it. A line ashore, and another to the head post, a twist around the bit, a hitch that opens when asked and never before. When the keeper lifts the green board on his pole, both bows trim a little as if acknowledging an old instruction they like to obey. The men at the balance beam take their places, one at each end, hands in mitts with the leather worn smooth, where oak learns them each season. The paddles open by degrees, the way real company comes into a room quiet, giving eyes time to find the table, the chair, the window. The first water through the culvert speaks in a throat sound that tells whether frost has been kind or bored. The keeper lays his ear to the hinge side and listens for the fuss a stray chip of ice might make, hearing none. He feeds the handwheel through its careful turns until the body of water remembers it is taller on one side than the other and begins to solve the problem. The level in the upper pound size downward to finger's width, the lower listens and learns. On the coping, the boy scratches to short marks on the slate with a stub of soap. 4 2 fingers, 4 4. He likes to see the day as little scratches before the book asks for ink. The balance beams swing later, when the difference suits them. Each beam owns a chain to a quadrant plate on the leaf heel. The pintle below carries the weight and keeps its grudge to itself. To men lean their shoulders into the beam's tail. At the supports, a stone stop waits to catch the beam, so it will stand level and the leaf will open with dignity. The mitre face is rubbed new with tallow and sand in October, and given nothing since sparse. Water curls polite about the coin. An ice chip thinks about introducing itself to the hinge recess and changes its mind. The lead through the chamber straightens, like a ribbon being tugged. The barges drift 1 foot, then 2 until the bowlines make their small question marks, and then smooth themselves. Stays and check ropes do their civil work. The bowman on the first barge gives a single hand up, then pays out until the eye says enough. On the wall, the boy steps deftly between bollards and fenders, keeping rope from learning puffed up ideas about crossings and kinks. A plank boat nudges, along with a boat hook men in it dress a flow that got ambitious. A pike pole under the ice edge persuades the slab to behave and go under the main like everyone else. No one pushes more than they need. Canal men distrust grand gestures. In the lower pound, the winter dredge sleeps under a roof, its bucket ladder stripped, its links hung in pairs to stop them rusting into sentences no one can finish. A man with a file dresses the edge of one bucket, the work of a winter, when ice makes true dredging a hobby for liars. He does not imagination his file keeps the lake deep. He knows his file keeps spring from beginning with a curse. At the far bank, range boards white black white stand, like friendly judges, waiting to be read by eyes in summer, when the lead down the Narva bend teaches helmsmen how to keep a straight opinion of themselves. A telegraph wire runs along the towpath, wintertight between posts, its insulators set at angles that put daydreams back on their feet. The keeper's lad steps into the lockhouse and taps a short line to the harbour office, upper open to down level -2. The sounder responds with a note, as if to say, the lake agrees. Down beyond the reeds, somebody must be tapping the same cadence into a book that smells like coal and sea. If you soften into the chair by the stove, rest there. The wind will not move the beam farther than it should. The paddles will not invent velocity. The book will be waiting when you pick it up again. The barges settle into the chamber, their fenders petting the stone with small, unimaginative nobility. The paddles lower, the handwheel ratchet clicks in minor keys, the water grows thoughtful, and then still. The men at the beams set their palms to the oak, and the leaves come in, heels first, faces following, until the mitre closes and the joint becomes an idea rather than a line. The gate dog drops into its notch. When the keeper raises his arm with the red board, the stern lines straighten and the crews lean, as if the day weighed exactly the same as yesterday, and none of them complained then either. A lock is a clock with a wet pendulum. Every man here knows its ticks, and does not call them by names, only by gestures. The keeper wipes his hand on the same place on his coat that has always been used for this purpose. The boy sets the kettle to a trifle more draught. Someone from the towpath brings in a range stave, new paint on its face, and stands it near the stove to teach it patience. In summer, the stave will ride a boat ahead of a lead line, for now it learns indoor weather. Midday earns a longer paw. The lake, lifted in the night by wind that forgot its manners, has refused the lock the ease it normally offers. The keeper opens upper paddles 4 turns each and watches the board. The numbers lower with a pleased slowness. He keeps the wheel in his left hand, and his right on the coin stone. Men who prefer instruments forget to use stones taught him early. When a gust sweeps lint across the sheet and blows the steam from men's mouths sideways, he adds a turn and then takes it back when the gauge rod kisses a number with more confidence than it had any right to. The boy notes, one more turn tried and repented, not to mock, to remember which days asked what from whom. In the work shed, a trunnel box waits with oak pegs pointed and greased, wedges split neat and kept in sizes someone's thumb can tell apart in the dark. A jar of tallow, feathers lying across it like punctuation, sits on a shelf that knows its own nails. The smith has left 4 new gudgeon straps on the bench, a curl of iron from the last chisel tempering sleeps by the vice. Beside them, a bag of flax tow, for packing a capstan post signposts that there are secrets even water cannot be allowed to know. When a hand reaches for any of these things, it finds them upright, not sideways, edges covered, threads tied. That is a kind of religion here. Afternoon lowers itself carefully into the reeds. A team comes along the towpath, 2 horses, bells wrapped, so they do not make a point, collars rubbed with tallow, where hair complained last week. The towline runs on a low roller. At the stern of the barge, the helmsman stands in his coat, with a scarf that admits wind will try its tricks and go home board. He watches the range boards on the far bank, then watches the way the towline enters the water. Both say the same thing, a bit more starboard now, then let it be. He does not instruct the horses. The towman on the path reads with his elbows and tells them in their own language a gentle truth. The lock takes the pair with the same formality as bishops and bread. Ropes voice softly. Water listens. The beam shoulders accept weight and return it to the hinge, and coin like a memory, put in the right drawer. On the sills the gate seat whispers that it was dressed in October, not November, and is therefore ready now for anything winter thinks it can teach. Men who were there nod once at nothing in particular, and put a hand briefly on the coping stone, the way some men touch the lintel of a door that has been kind during storms. Downstream of the lower gate a fisherman moves along the bank, where a cut in the ice makes a lead for oxygen. He sets his net under the sheet with a pole, slides the stake into the notch, and brushes snow back the way he found it. He tips his cap to the keeper lifts his hand without politics. The fisherman will come back at dusk, and the lock will still be a lock, and the water will still be water, and the lake will be what the lake always is, a sum that carries all digits, none of which insist on clapping for themselves. If your eyes close and open again, you will find the same small procession still going on. A stool pushed back when someone stood, a whisk broom laid bristles up, a padlock turned out of habit. Even in a room that does not require locks, a page of the book weighted with a stone so the next entry will not curl the last. Daylight works with men who hold these small ceremonies, and in return, daylight offers fewer surprises than it owes. Near evening, the wind veers from north to west and begins to talk more like a cousin than like a magistrate. The lead along the mitre line, kept open all day by saw and staff, and a boat hook that decided, long ago, to be a gentleman, varnishes itself with a delicate skin. Men walk it with their eyes and remember to look away before staring turns into hubris. The keeper claps his mittens together once to make warmth realize it lives here, then lowers paddles and posts the board, closed at dusk. He writes the hour. The boy takes the hand brush and clears the snow from the steps, pushing it where it will behave. He does not pile it against wood that keeps rot in its pocket. He learned that last winter at the cost of a week, and to good planks. Inside, the lock house sets the table of its own quiet. The book lives open with the string across it. A tin of sand sits by the pen as if teaching it about gravity. The kettle pursues its low thesis without the need for rhetorical flourish. A small wooden model of the gate gear, carved by a grandfather with the same hands as these, but with different scars, sits on the windowsill. The boys who come through will turn it, watch the rack walk the pinion, and say nothing. Later, they will reach for a wheel and find they were already ready. Night brings a lamp outside, glass wiped, wick trimmed, cap snug, and one inside with the same list of manners. Snow learns to land on the beams if it had been invited. Frost thinks about the coin and moves on. The book gets its last line. Lake rising, one finger up a calm, lower one down, ice leads safe to barges, one team, no complaint. The keeper rolls his pencil between thumb and forefinger until the wood shines a small half moon, and then sets it down where it belongs. The lake, out there, sends a short, deep crack like a measured laugh, and then agrees to wait for morning. In less than a month, men will set a rope from bollard to bollard and lay stop planks to dry the chamber for a day, and the half wedges will be reset. The heel post will have its shoe kissed with a file. A leather packing will be taught to remember. In less than 2, the dredge will rattle its chain with mild intentions, and the range boards will call across to pilots who boast privately. Tonight, none of that insists on being told. Tonight, a rope is coiled with its tail tucked. A wheel stops exactly where the next hand will want it, and a board outside in the dark remembers a number the way a face remembers a friend's name without fuss. Should you lose the thread for a minute, that board keeps it for you. The level will be the level when you return, and the gates will open only when called and close only when asked. The 13th part. Before the yard wakes its horses, the mince courtyard already knows how to be quiet. Frost sits on the copper rain chains like beads strung for no one. Inside, lamps persuade yellow from the air along a corridor where stone still holds last night. A door with a peep of mica gives on to the assay room. Here the day begins with dishes, the colour of old chalk couples of bone ash that drink what coins cannot carry into their future. We start with proof, not pride. A speck of alloy clipped from an ingot's corner with shears that make a sound like careful paper lies on a balance pan no wider than a thumb. Leaf weights line up like little opinions that refuse to shout. The assayer notes the mass in a hand that votes only once per line. The muffle furnace hums. He lays the cupel on the floor of the fire, slides the alloy onto the cupel, and closes the door to the color the day requires. Lead goes in 1 grain, 2 enough to learn the truth. The door opens to a slit. The eye watches the bright bead breathe the flame lick sideways in a draft that has been tamed by bricks and practice. A small plume walks the bead as base metals teach themselves humility and seep into the ash. When the bead brightens a quick shine that looks like a decision, the assayer draws the cupel onto a brick, lets it think in air, and measures again. Silver answers in numbers that match the book within the width of a hair. He nods, not to the room, to arithmetic. A trial plate thin, stamped and dated keeps a corner near his right hand. He touches it as a man touches a level before trusting a beam. Next door, the melt has its morning. Crucibles warm on a ring above a charcoal bed that does not make speeches. The melter charges silver and copper to a ratio the decree taught, a handful at a time, never letting the bath forget who is responsible. A skimmer draws back what looks like the lake bottom of metals. It goes to a pan that will become tomorrow's remelt, and not a problem today. A drop on an iron spoon calls to a button that snaps when bent in exactly the way that has pleased old men in aprons for 50 years. The pour comes without fuss, a lip caught by the runner of an ingot mould for moles laid like loaves on a bench of iron heads, shaved with a quick plane, so tomorrow's men will not curse today's, for leaving scars at the start. The rolling room speaks wood and iron. 2 pairs of rolls sit in frames, heavy enough to ignore weather. Between, men move with tongs and a pace that tells time, without seeking an audience. An ingot goes into the annealing furnace brick, fire quiet. A door with a hole a man can read colour through, without losing his eyelashes, and returns the colour of dull cherries. It dives into a trough, hisses, and forgets arguments it had with stiffness. The pickling tub weak acid cleans ox hides that learn the wrong language in the heat. A rag that knows its station takes the last stain. The strip feeds the rolls. The screw on the housings comes down a fraction. The strip thins the gauge a little frame with jaws that whisper truth, slides and stops where figures smile. The man with chalk writes 94 on the face, a number that means more 2 thumbs than 2 tongues. You can let attention walk to the window here and back. The rolls will make their passes, the strip will learn patience, the furnace will not demand applause. Blanking comes with rhythm and the civility you could take for softness. A fly press, fly weighted with 2 arms like a well-mannered windmill, drops a punch. Circles of bright metal pop from the strip with a sound halfway between a coin and the lid. Scrap walks in a ribbon to a bean for tomorrow's melt. Plankets the blank future of coins fall to a tray. A boy pushes them with the edge of his hand, so they lie in ranks that make counting kind. Another boy sweeps the table with a shoe brush to keep grit from learning to be permanent. Edges require memory. The upsetting mill to steel wheels with a throat that knows precisely how rude to be, accepts each planchette and presses a rim up around it. It's a little kindness with a brass knuckle, a raised lip that will protect the king's nose and the worker's date alike. After 100, the tray goes to anneal. The perforated drawers stack, each carrying a shallow layer. The furnace door draws back, heat shakes hands with metal. A minute later, the drawer meets a water bath, blankets clatter to the wire mesh below. Rain taught to be coins. Sawdust dries them without leaving an opinion. A sieve tosses the sound, becomes the room's own lullaby. Assay does not leave the shop to itself. A handful of blankets sit for a second test, specific mass, measured by weight in air and in water. A notebook with oil on its corners learns 3 numbers and leaves the rest unsaid. The foreman signs, not with flourish, but with a shape you could cut from tin and hang above a door to keep drafts honest. Edge lettering, if the issue calls for it, has its own narrow theatre. The cost-owing machine, 2 bands engraved with tiny letters, a collar that hugs each planchette while the bands walk its rim and whisper, or a mark to that effect when the year asked for it. The planchette comes out with secrets only fingers will discover before hats do. A man checks one with a touch in his pocket, as if warming a coin for a child. He's not sentimental, he's checking depth. His fingers decide it will survive pockets. Striking weights in the press hall, big screws, arms long as an ox yoke, caps that remember hands from men last winter and the one before. The anvil die lives in the bed, obverse or reverse depending on the mint's tradition this decade. The hammer die rides under the screw. In the collar, reeds lie in wait. If the coin's edge must carry them, the collar closes. As the planchette sits, the blow falls. The pressman sets a planchette with fingers learned from fires and knives, not in the die face, never in the space the die forgives. He looks not at the blow, but at the takeaway. Coin lifted face, clean letters, square beads, crisp brim caught like a stitch that will hold a jacket through a hard winter. If the mind softens into the steady, the screw will still come down with the weight it always brings, no more, no less. Metal will learn its new face and keep it without feeling you had to watch. A high press takes the larger module. To men push the fly, the screw drops. The sound is wood and iron, and the sigh that knows how much is needed. The coin on the tray comes up bright, its frost and polish making their small arguments on the cheeks of an eagle or the crown's neighbor. The pressman checks for a double strike the way men check for a loose latch, hand first, eye after. He rejects one per tray and slides it into a dish that lives on the bench like a kindly judge, not a failure, a practice that keeps standards from getting romantic. Counting is a craft. A board with shallow round cups 10 by 10 collects 100 quietly. A clerk's palm sweeps level. He'll forward the board tips coins, slide to a drawer in a soft spill that lungs like to hear. 5 boards, 5 drawers. Then a paper envelope stamped with the mint's blind mark, and the number a book will recognize if the envelope gets ideas about walking. Larger sums move to canvas bags lined with paper. Each one receives a lead seal squeezed on a cord. The seal press bites the lead carries a crest smaller than most buttons. The tag carries the date, the way a sober man carries a name. The proving scale, the big one on the bench, with its case, that closes like a chest takes a sample lot. A stack of coins goes both pans. Reference weights tell the truth. The beam lifts to level and the pointer settles, as if content with plainness. The checker writes a line in a hand that does not join letters. Some men trust their wrists to loops. This one trusts to angles. He scratches a little triangle in the margin to mean good to go, and the triangle becomes a habit from page to page. In a cooler room, the dice sinker keeps a separate weather. His bench light is sharp and quiet. A hub sits in a drawer like a dented moon. He lifts it with 2 fingers under. Never by the rim. Steel remembers bad touches. A new die, softened to receive, sits under the screw of a small fitting press. Heat the die. Lay hub and die together. Press, creep, press. The master tells the apprentice with his silence how long that last pressure lives. Later, the die gets hardened in oil bath and tempered to straw. A stone finds the burr that disrespected a serif. The die sinker scrapes once, wipes the face with an oily rag, and returns a tool that cares nothing for faces and everything for lines. Down the hall, a small room watches what fire can do wrong. A box of spent cupels sits in a bucket of water to quiet the dust. A note on the lid, 3 words, only prevents a boy from mistaking the box for a seat. A shelf holds trial plates dated in a row like winter counting itself. Another holds little cards that record which lot became which bag and which cart later. A thin wax wafer sticks to the corner of the card. The wax is for a seal that will travel with the cart. The card is for the man who unties the knots and writes numbers that never get bored. Lunch comes like a reasonable argument. Bread, sausage, a pickle, tea from a kettle that would be equally at home on a barge or in a lighthouse. Sugar if the morning went arithmetic's way. The men sit on benches, backs to a wall, boots on a board, because cement teaches cold to feet faster than stories keep it out. Talk finds a gear. It can stay in, rolls trude. Edge band proud. Punch wants a lick. Nitric stung yesterday. Rain maybe this evening. No one proposes theories about money. They make what will serve people who have their own ideas about what money does. That is enough. Afternoon returns to the same steps with a little less an ounce. Strips thin to final gauges. Knob plankets get their rims and risk a nap in sawdust. The presses receive their turn of 3 men and then 2. A superintendent walks slow, shoes soft. I'm not eager to catch, but eager to help. He places a fingertip on a press arm when it swings back and watches it quiver to rest. He does not approve of creaks. He likes complaints to be easy to locate and smaller than a man's pride. He writes nothing. He remembers what he can fix before tomorrow. A courier from the bank picks up the first sealed bags. He has a ledger familiar with how lead seals behave between rooms. He puts each bag on a platform, scale the pointer and his shoulders, learn the same number at once. A wagon waits in the yard with a chest that smiles with iron straps and a hasp that believes in its job. The driver wears gloves with fingers that forgive rope and respect locks. The guard sits without drama. The horses agree with the turn. The gate makes a square on the ground where it always does. The street says nothing louder than it said an hour ago. At a side bench, a woman ties strings around bundles of paper, envelopes then envelopes, 100 coins each. Her fingers make 3 moves, and a knot that remembers how to ask for generous teeth, and how to repay them by opening quickly if numbers want counting again. She touches each bundle to the corner of a stamp pad, where a small dry rule lives. Mark, then stack. The mark is a square with no words. The square tells another table these came from this room. Rooms that leave square tracks cause fewer misunderstandings. Toward evening, a press receives a final maintenance die out. Faces oiled with a cloth that confesses no grit bed swept with a brush, whose handle knows one hand well collar wiped and checked for bites, the screws thread taught to take a drop of oil, and yet not to overthink it. A card hangs on a hook with 3 lines: cleaned, dye back in, collar sound. The foreman's initials afterwards, as if a carpenter had knocked a beam once and then moved on. If you close your eyes briefly here, the room will hold your place. The fly will wait, the sawdust will keep drying coins. Without learning any new behavior, the book on the bench will still be open to a line that expects a truth someone was going to give it anyway. Shut down is a pageant of small reliabilities. The annealing furnace door drops a bar, slides home. The pickling tub gets its lid tongs. Hangmouth down, the sweep drawer under the punch table collects turnings and crumbs that will be silver again by Friday. Broom stand bristles up. The lamp wicks turn down to a red notion. Glass chimneys come off a 1/4 inch and cool without smoke. The clock in the hall makes a note of the hour on a face that will look no different at dawn and will be equally useful. A guard tries the window latch twice and prefers the second click. He is not superstitious. He is a man who has seen wine forget manners. Outside, the courtyard stones decide to keep their frost for at least another hour. In the far corner, a rain barrel shows a round of ice that rings under a finger. The cart waits at the gate with 2 more bags. The seal press does what it always does. Wax takes an impression shaped yesterday and last year and the year before. The driver checks the chest's lock once with a thought and then looks at the horses, which matter more. Back inside, the assay room wipes its table. Kooples call the ash remembers the metals it drank and keeps no grudge. The muffled door swings shut to feel alone for the night. The balance beam rests with its pointer dead center, only because no pawn bears argument. The assayer lays the trial plate in its drawer and sets the book with the page still damp under a blotter that will be a map in the morning of 3 little rectangles that chose to become numbers instead of dust. Across town, a shop will shut a cash drawer on coins that smell faintly of felt and the mint soap. A hand will run the rim under a thumb and feel reeds that ask to be counted and then suggest sleeping somewhere else. A child will stack 10 and 10 again, not yet concerned that 10 tens become 100, only pleased that the stacks make small castles that would be too heavy for any soldier made of tin to climb. In a week, the same coin will pay a man who wraps a lamp glass in paper and writes a town name on the paper with ink the paper mill would have approved of. The mint lets its air down. Keys find hooks. The echo that never raises its voice returns to the corridor. The courtyard takes the last cart's wheel track and lays it beside yesterday's, as if lines were things that could be inherited properly. The city makes evening well. Of course it does, and the mint agrees to be one of the places where machines sleep with better manners than most men and a few cats. The 14th part. The river keeps a slate color before day, as if it had written something down for itself and didn't need to show anyone yet. Granite piers hold their frost the way a ledger keeps columns. Iron rails along the footway take a breath when a palm sets to them. In the keeper's room under the span, a clock speaks in a small even voice. A kerosene lamp, already trimmed, waits its turn by the window. A key on a nail remembers one name and no others. On the wall, a board with pegs for the state of the bridge closed, half open, and a row of bell pulls that know which rope tells the capstan what it needs to hear. We start by reading the river. A yard staff stands at the pier face, black marks on white, half hands and full, the old habit of noting what glides past. The keeper leans out and touches the top of the board with a mitten, clearing a lace of ice. He takes the temperature on a brass stem and notes it with a stub of pencil that smells like cedar and winter. Current sets faintly from the east. The wind thinks about being useful later and decides to be civil for now. He chalks a small arrow on the sill where he likes to see it, just enough for a sleepy eye to remember which way the lift will favor the first minutes. Down in the drum room, the gear stands like furniture with a task instead of opinions. To chain drums as wide as a man is tall poles with springs that learned restraint, a shaft that crosses to the far pier under the roadway. Seated in bearings that had their grease warmed last night, a handwheel for each lock bolt sits by the doors The bolts run through the heel of the leaves and into granite. Simple faith in steel and stone liking each other. A row of oilers with felt wicks stands like small bottles of patience. The keeper slides a rag under a bearing and wipes what yesterday gave back. The lamplighter arrives in his coat, with the collar taut not to argue with the wind. He lifts the chimney with the little wire, pinches wicks to a shoulder, sets glass down without fingerprints, and moves to the next. He doesn't admire the reflections in the panes. He watches the lack of smoke and nods when lack behaves. Lanterns at the abutment take green and red shades from their draw, one face to river, one to road, so that people who cannot see lamplighters can still learn where they are meant to be. If the attention wanders with breath onto the window, nothing sulks. The gear will not seize the poles, will not forget the lamp, will keep the circle the way a saucer keeps a cup. At the top of the hour, the watchman from the police post walks the length and checks what can be checked with gloves on. Hinge pins sit where they should. The timber of the roadway does not lift at the joints the chain lock are shut. He draws a line on the chalkboard. Ice clear. Bells good. Signal rope dry. He tucks the chalk back in a place the boy could find with his eyes closed, because once, in a fog, the boy needed it with his eyes closed. The signal arrives the way good signals do, twice in two forms. From the Admiralty Telegraph, a short ring, from upriver a lantern raised, lowered, then raised, the long one that means prepare to lift for passage. The keeper pulls the black peg from closed and sets it in half, not because the leaves are half up yet, but because the men become half turned to their work just by seeing it. He opens the wicket gates at the ends of the footway, so no late hat will step into a story he didn't expect. The watchman swings the road chains across and clips them. The hooks know their cleats, and the cleats recognize their hooks. A pair of old friends without sentiment. A boat from the upriver barge comes ahead and lays a man with a boat hook against the pier. He looks at the chain guide's iron cheeks dressed smooth and lays his palm to them as if checking a horse. Warm enough, oiled, not proud. He pushes off and drifts into the eddy under the span to teach his eyes the difference between what he remembers and what is there. The keeper rings once and the drums answer by not moving. He walks to the lock bolts and turns each hand wheel one full turn. The bolts come home clear of their seats with that willing wooden note iron makes when it knows itself. Now the open. To men to each capstan arm. Shoulder set the keeper's lead hand on the brake wheel. Pulls lifted. Then set out of the way. The first pull lands like a yes with no audience. Chain climbs a tooth. Another tooth. Telling the counterweights in their pits to wake. The leaves call the first inch, then the second, and the river runs along their shadow as if it had planned to. The brake wheel stands too and gives exactly the resistance asked. A buoy lays the oil, can spout to a link. It passes the last idler one drop. Never two. The keeper watches the slacking line that leads to the far leaf to make sure both sides believe the same time. The chain pitch repeats under the floor. Brass, iron, wood. Breath the vocabulary ships trust when they come under a city at night. There is nothing here that wants to be dramatic. And that is why people feel they can walk out of a thought for a minute. When the mind returns, chain and leaf will be where they should be, and the pole will have found its tooth without needing to be asked twice. The leaves come to their rest against the stops that learned their rubber last winter. Pins set into sockets to keep a gust from teaching balance and attitude. The keeper drops the dogs at the quarter points. Their iron tips sit into their pockets and scold no one. Upriver, a tug noses a raft of timber through the mouth with its tow bridle low on deck. A man with a pike places the head below the surface to feel the current, not to scratch it. He raises his hand, and the tug breathes differently, and the raft straightens with a politeness that looks like consent, and is actually muscle memory married to line. A bell on the pier under the far leaf rings twice slow and careful, and the keeper answers with one on his side that matches wood for wood and rope for rope. The drift of ice that started earlier at the east bank comes along the pier face and splits at the nose. Slabs slide under the leaf heel. Someone in the boat taps a floe that pretended it had rights, and the floe forgets its argument. Under the draw, the sound turns two small teeth on wood, and then to quiet. A boy on the footway rests his hands on the rail and counts posts until counting becomes something else. He straightens before it becomes nothing. Down in the room again, the keeper's hand visits each bearing. Warm, not hot, contented, no smell of belt near the break. He checks the pins in the pawls, not because they will move now, but because a check done at an hour, when the jaw sets to rules, keeps that jaw from learning new words later. He writes pins checked, break good in a margin, with another line about wind. He doesn't fill the page, he lets the day make its marks, without encouraging it to think it was called upon to write a book. After the last timber clears, a lighter shows and passes with a sound like a small cupboard closing itself, planks against fenders, and rope muttering. The keeper raises his lamp to find the edge of the leaf and watches the water run off in threads. He breathes into his glove before he takes the chain, a habit more of courtesy than of need. The men at the capstan set their hands again. The keeper lowers the brake pawls, sets a polite chain, runs backward into its box, like a rope that knows when to be modest and when to be brave. The leaves come down with the grace men to attribute to animals when they are really thinking of well-made tools. At the last foot the brake holds and then gives in inches. The heel kisses its plate, the lock bolts run home into stone with a sound that could heal other noises. Dogs rise, wedges take their places. The keeper strikes the chain with a fingertip and hears a note he recognizes. He sets the board peg from half to closed. He does not look for applause. The city does that by not noticing trouble. You can leave your attention with the river now. The span will hold. The lamps will count the posts. The clock will prefer one beat to others, because it was built for that and likes to honor it. The day's second lift comes at blue hour. Upriver lights make little eggs on water. The downriver haze hides the rope of the tow except when the tugs will throw sparks into spray and teaches a gull to move aside without conversation. The lamplighter returns and wipes a glass with a cloth that doesn't shed. He shows the boy the tiny crescent of soot that comes off a chimney when the wick learned a bad cut and says nothing else. The boy sees it and remembers. One forked bell at the head of the span meets another at the tail. Somewhere on the left bank a shot from a yard tells someone a cable has more to say than the man pulling it. The bridge does not answer. The bridge has learned silence and uses it. In the keeper's room, a small stove keeps its corner honest. A pot rests onto iron bars, and the lid taps a little when steam needs to argue. Bread from the morning sits covered by a cloth that smells faintly of flour and iron. A wedge of cheese, a pickle from a jar with a lid that fits exactly right. Food that does not ask for an audience. The keeper sets his cup on a ledger to keep the cold from getting under it through the table. He flips a page to look at last year's week. The ice, then was worse the wind, then was kinder men, then said the same 3 or 4 true things and went about their business. At night's bottom a barge loses a step entering the fairway. One push from a sweep brings it back. The keeper feels the beam breathe rather than sees anything. He lays the brake and changes the angle of his jaw. That is enough. The men on the capstan do not feel embarrassed by how little there is to do. They feel content that small things were done at the right seconds. The pawl rises and falls and lives where it lives. Close comes the hour when the span stays down until morning, so cards will be able to finish their sentences. The keeper checks the lock bolts twice, because once is good and twice is remembering. He draws a line through the time on the chalkboard and writes a quiet done. He places the key back on its nail. He turns the lamp wick down until it looks like a thought. He sets the pegs in their morning places, because morning sometimes forgets to set them where they belong. This way, morning is invited to behave. Above, the road frost takes the feet of the last 2 men who were going to cross, whether the bridge was up or down, and releases them again. On the water, a catwalk under the leaf platform remembers a carpenter's foot from last spring and holds that footprint all winter, where it will do no harm. A rope under the pier whispers to itself once, and then lies still the way rope does when it is content to be rope and not story. If your eyes go heavier here, the river will keep your place. The peg will still be at closed. When you wake, the lamp will still be a circle. The hinge will not have decided to be anything but a hinge. In the morning, the yard staff will tell numbers in the same language. The bell pulls will still recall which rope says what, and the men will arrive with shoulders ready for what shoulders ought to carry, nothing more. The tisses and quits. The pig bed gets raked and wetted for the night pool. A boy learns to throw water with a flat pan so the sand doesn't tear. He succeeds on the fourth try and looks at the floor, not at the men, because he wants to remember what his hands felt. A foreman walks with a slate and chalk and marks the stuff that should not be left where night can talk to it. Wedge on sill. No oil rag on beam. No tongs under helve. Never. He moves each to a better future. He straightens a broom and sets it bristle up better for the broom, better for the work. He turns back the lamp wicks where he finds them too ambitious. Lamps trimmed at dusk wake cooperative in the morning, lamps left proud teach grudges. The ledger takes the day. Charcoal sleds 7 or binge charged 5 pigs cast 36 blooms 4 bars 12 bundles rods to bundles slag tap thrice. The seal rolls a little bear reached up for a hammer. A joke someone allowed 15 years ago and the wax takes its set. A hand in the margin draws the small mark that means watch the wheel rope. A note not for scolding but for friendship with the rope that has taken men through more winters than they had years to give back. Supper reaches the yard while the last bars call. Soup with barley and a bone that gave twice a pickle a corner of pie, or a wife guessed rightly about energy left at the end. A man eats with his cap in his lap, not because of a rule, because a habit is a kind of pillow. The talk says what talk says in good places. Tomorrow the creek will lift and well float the pigs before noon. The east window drips and wants a new putty. Ivan's boy can catch a coal with tongs without looking like he is making a promise to anyone. The bell shuts down first, then the wheel. Water keeps going because rivers do not read ledgers. The paddles turn an extra quarter and give a last yes so small, mistake it for a leaf turning in our low branch. The bellows rest with their mouths a little open, the way a dog sleeps when it knows it is being admired by people who will continue to be people tomorrow. The hammer's head finds the block gentle. Someone lays a rag on the face, not for polish, but because iron likes politeness and pays it back. By the pits, the milers wear their turf coats again. The vents smoke a thread, the plugs sit where a hand can find them by memory in the dark, which is good because the best way to sleep here is to know which things can be reached without eyes. A shovel's shadow looks long and unconvincing, the shovel itself looks short and certain. A brush hangs on a nail with its bristles combed, which is the right way to teach a brush to behave in the morning. Snow begins light, as if making sketches before committing to a picture. The sled runners lean on the fence. The rope net dries under the eave to baskets sit clean side down, so night cannot blow questions into them. The ledger die cuts the page with a small notch for where to begin when dawn repeats the problem of time. A man checks the padlock on the store and pushes a wedge under the door that thinks about arguing with its threshold. He taps the wedge with the heel of his hand and says nothing the door hears. In the cottage row across the stream, lampshades show the same deep honey in each window. A child holds out a palm and someone drops into it a scale flake. Sharp and glassy, the child turns it to watch it catch the light and then sets it on the sill. A little river found a way to become a stone. Tomorrow a broom will gather it with 100 siblings and they will go to the path again. Tonight it is a thing that proves the day. Before the last man leaves the casting floor, he looks along the pig bed and drags the strake once to smooth what the paw ruffled. He does it for the same reason others rake sand at sea after footprints, to close the day with the same quiet the day asked for at dawn. He sets the strake on 2 pegs, teeth to the wall, and lays the stick he used for drawing ribs across its top. The stick remembers his hand's pressure and will tell him in the morning if he has changed. He blows out the lamp until the wick glows a cherry and then a shadow. Smoke makes a small question mark and then forgets it. Outside, the water wheel lets a last drop fall from one bucket and then another. The drop lands on the same stone it always lands on and does nothing to the stone anyone can see. The forest behind the pits measures the night in ribs and branches and keeps the cold where cold is expected to stay. Far down river, someone walks with a lantern and a bundle of rods that will be nails by noon. The light bobs, then steadies. The rods do not complain. The world takes a breath that is not an announcement, but could be mistaken for one by anyone who didn't learn to tell the difference here. The fifth part. Before the hoof dust has decided to stay down, the fairground shows its ribs. A row of poles becomes a street ropes climb. Canvas learns its corners, and wooden counters unfold, as if they had always preferred to be flat. The Oka and Volga keep their low talk beyond the embankment. Between river and sheds, a weighbridge yawns the scale platform of planks that sigh when a cart rolls on. The steelyard beam above with its sliding poise. Lamps hang cold under the crossbeams, their glass chimneys clean from last night's hand. A man sets out measures, their names as workmanlike as their shapes. An archine stick of forearms honest yard. A little more than 2 feet goes to the front of the cloth bench, to nested weights front and pood sit beside the steelyard. A pound you can hold in one palm. A trade weight that asks your legs to earn their day, about 16 kilos. Though no one here needs the number to know its truth. A thin lead seal press rests in a cloth bag. A boy lays it near the string-lipped bag of tags, each tag a round clay coin, with a hole and a mark you could find by fingers in lamplight. The first carts arrive, while the river is still deciding about glare. Tea chests wrapped in matting show brushstrokes. No one at this end can read. And yet everyone knows them. A hammer with a narrow wedge pries out the bamboo pins that keep lids obedient. The lid comes up, a press of scent walks the table. Leaf on leaf, brick on brick, the green and the brown and the tired black that will go to porters. A kettle coughs on a brazier, a small enamel cup meets water that just forgot to sting, and a pinch of leaf lays down its hand. No ceremony. Taste, nod, chalk a line on the crate lid that will make sense to the man who loads at dusk. The next store wakes in cloth. Bolts unroll, coarse, fine, checked, striped. A woman smooths the first elbow's worth, lays the archine once, twice, then a quarter the stick's nick at the butt end, whispers enough. She cuts with shears that have learned not to show off, and binds the piece with a strip of selvage. An ink stamp meets the cloth's edge, store mark, day mark, a small bow in the wrist. She moves like someone who has weighed flour with her eyes and seldom been wrong. Coins will cross later for now. There is chalk and a book with a column for road that keeps sleep honourable. Smells take their places. Warm pitch at the rope seller's corner, where flat lines coil just so. Wheels of soap near the maker of soap yellow. Lionist, cut in rectangles with a wire. Dried fish at the far end, where wind agrees to help. Someone beats dust from a carpet over a rope. Someone else rolls out a strip of felt and sets a low brass lamp on it, and a tray of cups. The lamp shows a small, reliable tongue. A cat, serious without malice, occupies the shadow under the hardware table and decides this will be her square of cautious peace until a cart brings new rust for her to supervise. You can let the mind unbutton a little and still keep the thread. Counters settle. Ropes take the pull they live for, and hands remember figures without drilling them through your ears. At the weighing shed, the beam says what it always says, level or not, and nothing more. A cart of taller ironware clatters aboard hinges in a keg, flatware tied in bundles, a shallow pan that learned last night to sit flat on a stove ring and then sat flat forever. The weigher walks his fingers along the chain, hooks the ports, pushes the slider until his thumb knows the quiet between too much and too little. He writes pood 7.5 with a small curl on the half that will be kind to a tired eye later. A T-man's clerk opens a ledger, lead by the way it rests on the board. Columns, learned sums. He writes 6 chests, middle grade, 1 small cask, and rolls a thumb over a red wax wafer to warm it. Then presses the tea house seal, a leaf and 2 characters that look like ladder and gate. He ties a tag through the chest's cord with a loop knot that wants one nail to undo. The nail lives on a string loosely tied to the man's vest. He has not lost it in 12 years. The string is not pretty, it is the sort of practicality that keeps burlap from inventing theatre. At mid-morning, the fair makes its best music. Not fiddles. There are fiddles under canvas in rooms, with benches and bread, but that other music? The click of a tiny weight entering a pan. The soft rip of paper twists as sugar finds its measure 4T, the little iron hinge at the base of a scoop, the brush on a bench edge pushing crumbs where brooms can finish the thought. Knots get tied, and tested feet bend under sacks. The arsheen kisses cloth, a copper pot lid tries a note, and gives up quickly. Across the main path, a lampman teaches a new lad how to trim a wick without teaching it pride. The chimney comes off with a twist, the char falls to a tin, the wick edge gets a gentler bite from a small knife than would be given to bread. The boy breathes to near the lampman, tilts the chimney to shield it from that breath, smiles without accusation, and sets the glass down. When the wick learns around quiet bright, the lampman lowers the globe. Lamplight approves of such manners, so do customers. The bridge between the two rivers holds a parade of burdens that do not consider themselves brave. Bale, bolt, crate, cask. Porters wear leather breast guards to keep rope from writing letters on their ribs. One signals with his chin to the wayshed that the bridge will accept another cart. The weigher lifts his chalk and nods without turning. He chalks a small arrow on the planks where the next set of wheels should find their groove. The arrow will be gone by noon and redrawn as if that were its secret job. A merchant from Kazan folds a ledger page back and shows a posting last year's tea against last year's cloth. The man from Ivanovo presses his lips, not to argue, to think. They agree on a number and a date, not out loud. The lead seal gives the number, the clay tag gives the day. The seal press bites the edge of a paper ribbon, and the ribbon ties the bundles of responsibility together so that even a sleepy porter will not set them on the wrong cart. The two men drink tea that tastes of dust's morning and sugar's afternoon, and they say things about hay and wheels and lads with loose hands that sound like jokes and are not. If sleepiness leans on your shoulder here, the fare will hold your place. Weights won't lie while you drift, ropes won't sulk, the columns will wait without smearing. In the shade behind the spice tent, a cooper checks hoops with a hammer that knows when it wants encouragement and when it wants to be left alone. He turns a cask, sniffs, and declares it fit for tea, not oil. He rubs a wedge of tallow along a joint and teaches it to forget gaps. Beside him, a man seals the bung of a small barrel with a ring of wax so fine it looks like a child's bracelet. He presses a barley ear into the wax while it is soft to remind someone else that the contents prefer dry rooms and a short leash. The clock in the makeshift tower over the customs door lifts a bell with a patient rope. It strikes without scolding anyone for being late. A clerk at the customs table has a sandbox for drying ink, a sharp goose quill, and an arm that has learned to write the same 36 words in any order with the same affection for straight lines. His hand looks ordinary and is the reason some men sleep well. He slides a stack of stamp papers into a pigeonhole and pulls out a new stack with the weight of promises already in it. A woman from Ledyshed shows a hank of indigo that refuses to brag, blue like a quiet river. She bathes a strip in water from a tin dipper, the blue stays. The beer nods and writes a small bow-shaped sign in his book to mean takes like kindly. He does not write blue that will survive a child's knees, but that is what he means. Near the quay steps, a bellcaster's apprentice carries a clay core the size of a stool on a board across his knees. He moves with the care of someone who has made a small object that will be punished by gravity for thinking above itself. He passes a stall of icon boards, linden plane to a hush, back braces joined with dovetails that do not shout. The seller slides a finger across a surface to show a lack of pride. Wood that will take gesso smoothly. Drink egg tempera as if remembering harvest. Hold varnish without cloud. He sells the surface, not the picture. And this is a kind of honesty the fair quietly respects. By early afternoon, the fair's shade has learned where to stand. A sheet of linen hangs between poles to make a cool lane under it. A scribe rents his hand, and is good ink to men whose tongues write well, but whose fingers argue with quills. He writes a note to a wife about a bolt of printed cotton with tiny leaves on it. He writes a note to a cousin about a crate coming by river next week that should be kept dry and not argued with. He writes a list of tools for a smith, each word a shape a hand can count: chisel, fuller, drift, rasp. He puts the paper in a clay envelope and rolls his cylinder seal, the one with the 2 horses across. He ties the string through the hole and hangs the letter on a peg to dry. Now and then, the fair behaves like a shipyard or a canal, because the same rules work. Keep tools where they live, give names to your notched trim wicks when the day says so, burnish a small part, and the larger thing grows patient. A boy watching from a bench absorbs half of this by leaning to the left when a bundle leans, and by lifting his hand to steady a cup before it spills. He will leave at dusk thinking he only watched. By morning, his wrists will know to reach sooner. Rain threatens in the distance and decides against it. The lamps get their first light anyway, thin flames tested against glass that doesn't want soot, wicks trimmed into neat shoulders, so the night will sit evenly. A lamp lifted with one hand and held above a stack of bales makes their edges visible without making them nervous. A merchant with a straight back adjusts one tag on a chest, then another, until the string lines lie the same way. That is how you keep weather from inventing a story. You straighten tags. Toward evening, the steelyard sings one more balance. A cart rolls on with 2 bales and a barrel. The slider finds its place, the beam rests a fraction low, the weigher taps the pan, and the pointer listens. He pushes the poise a hair, then another hair, then the beam finds level. He says nothing. He does not need to. A line enters the book about 2 poods and a half, and the clerk draws a small loop on the half that will save someone's temper tomorrow. Lanterns now. They make small islands out of counters, leaving a sea of dark where steps go slower and voices choose fewer words. Rice paper around the tea stall turns to warm parchment color. The spice man's jars keep their day's warmth under their lids. The rope seller ties a last figure 8 around a coil and pins a tag with a tiny copper tack. He will find it tomorrow, and so will the man who needs it, and neither will remark on the luck of it. Men carry bundles on their backs, supports underhand, the way men have carried bundles for as long as bundles needed carrying. You might not hear under the lamps. The fair will remember your place with a chalk line, a tag, and a rope. Nothing will be lost on account of an eye that learned the day and needed a short hour. A last service. Straps for the tea cart checked and rubbed with tallow, a cover thrown, a net settled, knots turned tails inward, so wind cannot untie them by guessing. Papers go into a leather wallet that has learned to live in a breast pocket without swelling. The wallet knows 3 kinds of words and treats them the same. The names of things, the names of promises, the names of routes. It fits, and that is enough. At the quay, barges breathe against fenders that could be elder brothers of the fenders. Back in the canal village upriver, a man throws a heaving line, another bends on a chest, rises from a shoulder to a deck with the single, respectful push of a gaff. The river takes on responsibility without dramatization. A lamp behind the hatchway makes a small, clean ellipse on the deck. The skipper puts his hand flat to the plank and feels the day's last warmth leaving, like a guest who said everything necessary and not one thing more. Back inside the market lane, the lampman pinches a wick and caps a chimney. Coins are counted, then put away, then counted again for the quiet in the counting, not the number. The arsheen returns to its peg. The seal press goes into its cloth bag. The lead tags line up on a nail with all their holes pointing the same way. A broom stands, bristles up. A cat uncurls and stands with the gravity that cats believe they invented. Across the bridge, the fair looks like a village that became a thought and decided to remain a village anyway. The clock rope lowers the bell's tongue to rest. Weights cover themselves with a cloth because metal likes that courtesy. The 2 rivers keep their small talk and resign themselves to the way markets finish. Nothing undone, much unsaid. Everything easy to find in the morning. The 6th part. Before the sun makes up its mind over the line of low hills, the caravan yard at Kyakhta is already a sentence with most of its verbs in place. Camels kneel on their own time, with legs folded like careful tools, bales lie in 2s and 3s under reed mats. A post with a crosspiece keeps the first rope out of the dust. The air has that old leaf sweetness that tea keeps even inside matting and bamboo pins. A man rubs a thumb across a lead seal until its face wakes a tower. A A date, a notch he made with a nail months ago on the other side of the border. He doesn't admire the seal, he trusts it, the way rope trusts a ring. We start with weights the hands can count. The beam scale here is a big brother to the fairground steel yard. An iron tongue, a slider that remembers its own pauses. To leaf weights in a cloth roll that never get lost because the roll ties to a belt in winter and rides under a shirt in wind. The tea chest comes up on a sling to men. One word and sits on the platform made of boards rubbed grey by 20 winters. The slider walks, the pointer settles. Chalk writes a number on the case lid, not for poetry, for the road. Camels remember how to rise when rope begins its first sentence. A pad goes on thick felt, stitched with palm twine. The saddle frame sits over it. The cinch learns the right hole. The handler's knife sits tight in a sheath. Its edge meets a strap not to show off, but to teach the day to flow. Bales are in pairs, so balance can be a conversation and not a trial. Left, right rope over, rope undercross with a twist that knows how to open later in gloves. The knot sits low enough to avoid the bell, high enough to avoid ribs, exactly where habit puts it. A bell hangs under the jaw of the lead camel brass, not bright. A round tongue shaped by someone who learned how to make a circle think. That note keeps the line honest when dust makes men shorter and wind persuades eyes to forget. Behind the bell, a pair of small clay tags on the breast strap make no sound at all. One with a wedge for this yard's seal, one with a scratch for the road to Irkutsk. The scratch is a joke. If scratches can joke, it is really just a memory that fingers can read when eyes are busy with ice. We leave west with the sort of ceremony the road likes: quiet, count, and then the first foot. Winter knows how to make miles behave. Snow in the hollows sits hard and find the line tracks along brush markers and read flags where a man has decided more than once to make the world's edge speak. Sleighs take some of the load where the track allows. Runners waxed with tallow and ash a brake shoe that does as much as a stern look, no more. The camel feet find the depth with their soft pads. Hooves from the spare horses pick a stiffer path on the crown. Bells say yes, yes, to a tempo men agree with. Irkutsk comes like a memory of market more than a city, with courtyards that smell of bark and yeast and the inside of fur. There the ledger gets its first long breath, chest numbers, bundle counts, a note about a broken bell repaired with reed, and a pine peg, and a cord goes through the ear of a new lead seal. A clerk with fingers thin as paper edges warms wax on a saucer held above a lamp and presses a stamp that still remembers Yermak without making speeches about him. He sands the new writing, blows once, and sets the page flat with the back of his hand, so the lines lie where they mean to. Then the lake. By coal lays a straight thought under our feet for as far as a day cares to see. In good cold, the surface is a slate that writes under runners and then erases, polite, behind. For branches mark the way in lines that make sense to men who have worked a rope across a river before dawn. Where a Polinia keeps its own counsel, men lay brush and snow and listen like carpenters listening to a beam. The ice tells the truth if you don't ask it to lie. We step the loads from camel to sleighs for the long white mile. Chest, chest, bale, bale. Then a rope net that makes drifting into a thing that happens to other people. At mid-lake a runner stops, listens and smiles without showing teeth. The ice sings a long, deep vowel that stretches like a wineglass tuned by a winter giant. To a fresh ear, it scolds to men with tea on saddles. It says what wind on hemp says alongside a river. Keep your hands where they know themselves. A man lifts his boot, taps twice before the sun makes up its mind over the line of low hills. The caravan yard at Kyakhta is already a sentence with most of its verbs in place. Camels kneel on their own time, with legs folded like careful tools. Bales lay in twos and threes under reed mats. A post with a crosspiece keeps the first rope out of the dust. The air has that old leaf sweetness that tea keeps even inside matting and bamboo pins. A man rubs a thumb across a lead seal until its face wakes a tower. A date, a notch he made with a nail months ago on the other side of the border. He doesn't admire the seal, he trusts it, the way rope trusts a ring. We start with weights the hands can count. The beam scale here is a big brother to the fairground steel yard, an iron tongue, a slider that remembers its own pauses, to leaf weights in a cloth roll that never get lost because the roll ties to a belt in winter and rides under a shirt in wind. The tea chest comes up on a sling to men, one word, and sits on the platform made of boards rubbed grey by 20 winters. The slider walks, the pointer settles, chalk writes a number on the case lid, not for poetry, for the road. Camels remember how to rise when rope begins its first sentence. A pad goes on thick felt, stitched with palm twine, the saddle frame sits over it, the cinch learns the right hole. The handler's knife sits tight in a sheath, its edge meets a strap not to show off, but to teach the day to flow. Bales are in pairs, so balance can be a conversation and not a trial. Left, right rope over, rope undercross with a twist that knows how to open later in gloves. The knot sits low enough to avoid the bell, high enough to avoid ribs, exactly where habit puts it. A bell hangs under the jaw of the lead camel brass, not bright, a round tongue shaped by someone who learned how to make a circle think. That note keeps the line honest when dust makes men shorter and wind persuades eyes to forget. Behind the bell, a pair of small clay tags on the breast strap make no sound at all. One with a wedge for this yard's seal, one with a scratch for the road to Irkutsk. The scratch is a joke. If scratches can joke, it is really just a memory that fingers can read when eyes are busy with ice. We leave west with the sort of ceremony the road likes: quiet, count, and then the first foot. Winter knows how to make miles behave. Snow in the hollows sits hard, and find the line tracks along brush markers and reed flags where a man has decided more than once to make the world's edge speak. Sleighs take some of the load where the track allows. Runners waxed with tallow and ash, a brake shoe that does as much as a stern look, no more. The camel feet find the depth with their soft pads. Hooves from the spare horses pick a stiffer path on the crown. Bells say yes, yes, to a tempo men agree with. Irkutsk comes like a memory of market more than a city, with courtyards that smell of bark and yeast and the inside of fur. There the ledger gets its first long breath, chest numbers, bundle counts, a note about a broken bell repaired with reed, and a pine peg, and a cord goes through the ear of a new lead seal. A clerk with fingers thin as paper edges warms wax on a saucer held above a lamp and presses a stamp that still remembers Yermak without making speeches about him. He sands the new writing, blows once, and sets the page flat with the back of his hand, so the lines lie where they mean to. Then the lake. Baikal lays a straight thought under our feet for as far as a day cares to see. In good cold, the surface is a slate that writes under runners and then erases, polite, behind. For branches mark the way in lines that make sense to men who have worked a rope across a river before dawn. Where Apollonia keeps its own counsel, men lay brush and snow and listen like carpenters listening to a beam. The ice tells the truth if you don't ask it to lie. We step the loads from camel to sleighs for the long white mile. Chest, chest, bale, bale. Then a rope net that makes drifting into a thing that happens to other people. At mid-lake a runner stops, listens and smiles without showing teeth. The ice sings a long, deep vowel that stretches like a wineglass tuned by a winter giant. To a fresh ear, it scolds to men with tea on saddles. It says what wind on hemp says alongside a river. Keep your hands where they know themselves. A man lifts his boot, taps twice with the heel, and is content. A camel breathes into the scarf of the handler and forges a circle the size of one of yesterday's coins. The handler doesn't tell anyone, the circle already knows what it is. By the west shore the track climbs into trees again. A post station knows what we need without being asked. The stable is a room of breath. The stove's brick holds the day's seriousness. A ladle sits where anyone would reach. The samovar bubbles, the low polite argument it bubbles in a barge cabin or a weaver's room or a lighthouse. The driver's padora's naya lives under a spoon, folded, safe. We heat water, and the cup with a glass holder that has lived 3 lives steadies itself in a palm. One pinch from the pouch, a slice of lemon thin as this morning's moon, and the steam tells a story that the tea would not tell by itself. The sledges run off West Siberian miles without complaint. Inchy men a pair of iron-shod wheels meet the bundles, because the road to Perm wants wheels. Bales that sat like sleeping oxen now learn to stack like well-raised loaves, cross, strap wedge at the tongue. So the first rut doesn't teach everyone language they can't take back. A smith checks the wheel wedges with a hammer. That knows the line between share and preach, he gives a tap where would wants to forget winter, and then gives nothing where would wants to remember. Perm means river again, brown and large, and doing as it pleases under men who learned not to try to teach it. Barges do good work where the ice lets go flat, stout, not eager they sleep in mud in the wrong months, and are perfect for places like this in the right ones. Chests go aboard with gaffs and short words, bales with shoulder and kindness. Lead seals keep their faces proud. Rope knots show the same habits they showed in the camel yard. We do not reinvent, we repeat with care. On water, the world slows to a habit that lets shoulders drop half a finger. Someone knocks the samovar's draft tube, and listens someone else rubs wax on a hatch edge that squeaked in last year's thaw, and has decided to remember. A boy learns to set a fender right, so the boat's ribs won't learn brick. In the hold the chests breathe like meant slow, even through matting and bamboo that learned freight before our grandparents did, where the ox connects to the Kama, and the Kama to the Volga, and the Volga to everything else. We write a short line on a scrap of slate hung by the hatch, counted, wrote, dry, gentle. The 4 words don't cover everything, but they call the right things forward when it matters. A lock keeper leans over to read the mark on one chest that got its seal face set a little crooked in Kyakhta. He smiles and writes us through with the same hand that wrote the barge yesterday. You don't need luck here, just the same faces on the same ropes tied the same way. Moscow comes by degrees, first the little island warehouses, then the bridges that decided to be stone, then the courtyards with doors that swing on hinges proud enough to get polished and modest enough to quit squeaking. Myosnitskaya Street keeps its back straight. A door with a brass plate that has learned to be touched opens into a passage where sacks and crates whisper. A scale taller than a man waits under a beam black with the earnest work of hooks. The tea firm's name lives on the window in gold paint that tells the truth whether or not sun bothers to turn up. Inside, air is a ledger of smells. Leaf, wood, old rope, hot samovar, a little candle wax at the edges. Samples sit in round tins with paper lids tied in string. A man picks up a small tin the way other men pick up bones, thumb to rim, the rest of the hand making space for the nose. He pours a pinch into a shallow tray and rolls the leaf, not to crush, to wake. He sets a spoon with holes into the samovar spout, runs a finger of water into the spoon, and over the leaf descend the powder down to the little basin. Then he pours, slow, a short cup. Glass shows the color. He tastes with lips, not tongue, enough to invite the throat to have an opinion, and then stops. He notes in pencil, not bad, better with longer, not for the upper shelf, yes for samovar houses near the dock. He writes like a man writing weights, small, exact, not hungry. A clerk stands at the big book set on a block bench. He has straight wrists, which is the first qualification for this room. He writes chest numbers in a column that minds its margins, a date that minds its day, and a note that minds its future. Lead seals and cords hole at arrival matting fair to chests repinned on river. He presses a round seal into red wax firm's mark, a little spray of leaves, a line that looks like a river you'd cross with a rope hand, ties a tag with a knot that opens when a nail learns its place. He hangs the tag on a pegboard where every peg speaks with a number someone could find in the dark just by remembering the shape of the hole on the shelf. Upstairs, blending, bins the size of bathtubs hold teas that each know their one-line smoky, heavy, light, grass, autumn. In this room, those lines lay down over and under each other to make something nobody else can copy exactly without copying the hands. A man with a wide scoop walks leaf from bean to bean, counts to a number that does not feel like mathematics, and lifts 3 measures from a bean that only met the fern this morning. He tosses, not high, just over wrist. The seventh part. The platform keeps its breath in the cold, the way a glass keeps light steady. A little shy. Frost has written ferns on the lower panes of the waiting room. The bench along the wall knows the weight of coats, and parcels of broom stands bristles up near the door, because someone here respects mornings. Overhead, the big clock lifts the black hands toward the hour and holds them there as if to let the telegraph finish a sentence before it moves again. A lampman touches chimneys one by one, turning each, trimming each wick to a neat round that does not smoke, never boasts. Glass rings soft against metal, a flame settles. The station master's desk lives under the clock like a scale lives under its beam. On it, a block-printed timetable with today's pattern in blue pencil, a brass-cornered ledger with arrivals, unloads a ticket punch that bites a tiny star to inkstands 1-4 neatness, 1-4 speed, and a bundle of parcel tags threaded on a string, clay beads in. Beside the desk, the sounder clicks the way rain would if rain learned to spell. Short, long, a pause, a word coming to visit. The operator's fingers lie near the key, without touching the shoulders, do nothing theatrical. A pencil catches times in a narrow column. Numbers that behave. Out on the ballast, a porter slides a 4-wheeled truck from the goods shed to the shadow under the overhang. On the truck, crates stenciled glass, a hamper tied with reed cord, a basket of wrapped loaves that smell of last oven and next breakfast. The porter wedges a block under one wheel with a twist that comes from ankle and hand together. An old truth about friction that shoes and carts respect. He pats the basket with one mittened finger to check the tie and looks once at the sky in case it plans a surprise. Along the line, a signal arm holds its red like a polite hand raised for silence. The leather frame inside painted numbers, brass-notched quadrant weights for a palm to press and a forearm to lean. The signalman pulls, the rod runs, the arm falls to clear. He taps the lever head with the same knuckle every time habit puts a bow on safety when no one is watching. Wood breathes when iron speaks. A low far note comes along the track before the lights do. A tone that lives between wheel and rail and tells even sleepy ears which direction it has chosen. The engineer opens the cylinder cocks and they sigh white at the step, and the engine walks the last yard with a patience learned from plenty of coal and not quite enough vanity. Buffer's kiss. A screw coupling turns, the slack comes out and does not return. The guard's hand sets the brake wheel on the van with 2 turns. Not more. The thread feels right under glove, and the wheel stops exactly where the wheel likes to stop. Inside the booking hall, paper and ink do their old dance. A woman asks for to 3rd class to the junction and a half fare for a child who is busy with a button on a sleeve. The clerk vest shiny at the edge, where elbows polish clock spools 3 blanks from the stack, dates them with the stamp, writes the train number in a hand that balances each figure like a scale beam, then feeds each to the punch. Stars fall to a tin like polite ale. He slides the tickets under the slot, counts change with fingers that think in 10s and 5s because the coin tray taught them, and nods to the next pair of eyes without making noise of it. A tea boiler hums in the refreshment room. The samovar on the counter remembers many platforms. Its draft pipe glows. A private orange cups, nest spoons, keep their faces clean on a towel folded twice. A woman sets out small breads with poppy on top, and one knife with a thin edge someone sharpens on Thursdays. To passengers stand with their mittens off, cupping heat. Steam making a fork inside a fork. A boy sets the sugar tongs, misses once, adjusts, then leaves them where any hand will know what to do. It is hard for such rooms to misbehave when cups and tongs remember their drills. You can soften your attention here. The lamps will keep their circle of order. The clock will shift its minute when the sounder says the platform will remember how to stand still until the next set of steps asks it to be useful again. Baggage. Then, the scale by the door reads with a long pointer. A trunk comes up, a brass-cornered box that has learned to tolerate winter and settles on the pan. The pointer climbs, hesitates, and then finds the line. A tag gets a name in ink, the strap through the handle, the free end tucked, so it won't snag on kindness or on carelessness. A porter knots a length of cord around a basket handle with a bowl in that does not advertise itself. He tucks the tails under and out of sight. Small prettiness that nobody claps for makes station safe. Outside, a whistle says the part of a sentence that belongs to whistles. The guard looks along the length once and then again, not because of mistrust, because of manners. He raises his lamp, green held steady, not wagged. The station master answers with his own green. The signal arm stands down one last degree. The engine breathes coal fire with the old rhythm. Steam lifts iron, says yes to iron in a language this platform has spoken since it grew its first boards. The first coach door opens, a gloved hand lifts, a boot finds the step where step and boot meet halfway. Third class has benches, floor broomed after the last milk cans and boots. Windows show a slice of night that does not disturb. The wined edge around frames gets wedged with a snake of wool. Somebody's scarf decides to be a gasket. Between panes, a porter winks without impoliteness as he tucks it deeper. A shelf holds parcels that wish to be above feet for a little while. The lamp in the ceiling wears a glass with two collars. The wick finds its round and stays there. 2 or 3 voices say true small things. Then the coach decides to be made mostly of wood and cloth and sleep. The sleeping car farther back holds linen that knows how to crease and then forgive itself. A steward spreads a sheet that will be a map by morning, a blanket with a weight that calms, a pillow that believes. He snaps a berth strap, checks the ladder's hook, sets a water carafe in its ring, and tilts the shade so the lamp's thought will not argue with eyelashes. He folds a towel to a square that pleases a square table. The bell pull cord with its tassel hangs as if it invented discretion. The corridor's carpet runs like a soft sentence to the end door, where a window turns the outside into a slow picture. If you drift for a minute, hear linen breathing, wheels finding their long ovals. The train will not lose you. It has learned to carry people who step out and in of sleep without telling anyone. The guard's van is a workshop that refuses melodrama, a brake stand, the wheel where he can take a little speed away and give it back without making speeches, a stove with a small kettle on top and coal trimmed to fit, a rack for lamps green, red, white with wicks rolled ready, a box with spare cotter pins and a hammer whose face is honest, a shelf with chalk, string, sealing wax and a stamp that bit seals today and will bite them tomorrow without becoming proud. His log shows miles the way, a baker shows loaves lines in order that taste of discipline. Between coaches, couplers argue in their quiet tone. The buffers hold a conversation face to face, greasing between about distance and forgiveness. The screw tightens until the talk uses fewer words. A lantern swings on the hook with the engine's breath. The hook thinks about vibrating loose and decides not to, because a man checked it and touched it and said good. The steps down have ice in the corners. A boy with a banister brush shaves it off in curls that jump to the ballast and hide there. Down the line, a wayside station hears the night before it sees it. A bell hangs under the eave, rope wrapped in canvas, so a bare hand can find it. The station lamp wears a hood against wind that gets ideas. Snow at the platform edge is cut square so boots will find a true step even when weather invents fiction. The agent lays a hand on the rail not to test romance, to find whether his clock and the main line agree, and removes it before story can begin. He sets a sign in the window for the engineer. 1 lantern, not to a strip of white card, slotted at the edge, a mark everyone on this district knows. Then he goes inside where the stove keeps its own logic, and the timetable's blue pencil has already circled the hour that is now. Back at the big station, parcels move in a chain that will not raise the pulse. Milk to the van, bread to the refreshment room, newspapers to a stack tied crosswise, string ends tucked. The string is always tucked. The newsboy collects a coin, counts over change back to a man who is thinking about a letter and does not notice his own thumb receive 3 and not 2. That is why the boy counts aloud. Honesty here behaves like habit, because no one lets it become a prodigy. Snow begins to try its thin knives. The platform answers with sand. A boy with a pail shakes it from a fist where boots will land. Not too much, the next man still has to sweep. The brush at the door moves corners into lines The lines become a room. The lamplighter lowers a chimney with his little wire loop and trims a wick that thought about tunneling and got rescued by a thumb and a blade. He lifts the glass, sets it square, turns, repeats. The rhythm persuades the hour to be shorter without losing anything. A mail pouch arrives from the road in a sleigh that carries bells as if bells had never learned whirring. The pouch goes over the counter, onto the scale, into the ledger, out of the room, into the bag on the guard's hook, and gets its wax seal warmed with a lamp. The stamp's face presses the wax takes the face. Nobody speaks, as if this were delicate. They do it cleanly, and the pouch looks after itself afterward. Second whistle. Lamp's green flags agree the engine's poppet valves. Think the regulator opens, couplers tighten, slack leaves, the platform moves backward at a speed even a sleepy man in a hat can respect without doing arithmetic. The station master lowers his arm and returns to the desk. He slides the train card for no. 7 from expected to departed, and breathes the kind of breath that makes a vest move half a finger. He turns the page's corner down, so the ledger will remember the second line tomorrow. Inside the car, the stove heat decides to share. A woman takes off one glove, and then the other, folds them one into the other, sets them in her lap. A man sets his hat crown down on the rack, so the broom won't learn bad habits. Someone opens a book, and then closes it, because the lamp is too kind to push letters so late. The wheels make their old figure 8 under everything, the one that reduces headaches and conversations both to the size of a walnut, and then rolls them under the bench. A child counts the flashes of posts until counting becomes a dream about steps on a wooden bridge, and then that becomes something with bread in it. Past the yard, points swing by themselves under a rod and a hand somewhere, and the train slides into the proper night, the kind that grows on rails and fields and river mouths alike. The guard writes departed on time, snow fine lamps good break easy. He sets his pen down, listens to the wheel groove under him, and leans a hand on the brake wheel, a murmur enough to keep the couplers pleased. Then he pours from the small kettle into the small enamel cup and puts the cup where it cannot fall, because he knows from an older shift what happens if it falls, and has arranged not to repeat that scene. If your eyes want to close, this is a good hour. The car keeps the pace, the platform lights drift away into their own concerns, the clock in the hall lifts a minute and hands it to the next. On the line ahead, another signal arm has already decided to show green when asked. In a different town, a lampman wipes a globe with a cloth that does not shed. Somewhere, under a bench, a broom waits bristles up, and will be bristles up in the morning. The 8th part. The river turn behind the mill keeps a low green hush, the race sluice gives it purpose. Boards in the headgate glisten, where a brush pushed rosin yesterday. The iron rack that keeps driftwood honest wears a small bouquet of twigs that forgot to mind. Inside, the rag room lifts first, a frosty window half open to keep the nose from surrendering long tables, sacks that used to be shirts, chemises, officers' cuffs, nursery aprons, curtains with a history softened into edges. A bell on a ribbon hangs by the door, never rung, always there. On each table, 2 knives with rounded tips, a pair of shears, a copper scoop for buttons, and a little tin where lost pins go to admit their mistake. Rags sort to grades, the way flour sorts 2 sieves. White linen into the first bean, cotton after, coloured off to a corner that will become wrappers and envelopes, never the good foolscap. The oldest sorter works with both hands at once, a habit learned when wages answer to speed and care together. She fingers a seam, cuts it free with 2 short strokes, drops the seam into the sweep pan, and pulls the cloth into strips that a beater won't curse. Buttons knock into the copper scoop, bones go to the dog later. On to the boy who carves whistles, anything with ink thick as pride becomes wipe cloths for the pressman, not pulp. A ledger sits open on a nail driven through one corner, every hour mark goes there. Not for punishment, just the mill's quiet way of remembering its breath. Downstairs the wash tubs wake. A water wheel beyond the wall tells the shaft to turn, the shaft tells an eccentric to lift and drop a set of stampers, wooden hammers, with iron shoes into the tubs, until cloth forgets being cloth. Steam keeps its opinions low. A warm, clean damp with lies faint bite soap shaved with a knife notched at the inch, so no cook will ever steal it by mistake. The wash runs, the rinse runs, and a rake draws the pale strips onto wicker to drain. A boy carries baskets to the loft where air and rafters do their cure under the blackbird timber. In the loft, lines run straight, cloth hangs honest, a window stands open a finger's width to let wet go out and leave cool behind. The beating room is all pulse, to Holland beaters, chest deep, brimming with white water and a drift of linen cut to thumb width. Great roll stones churn, slow and exact, under bronze lids. The foreman lifts a lid and slides a sieve in the pulp climbs and falls like late porridge. He takes a pinch, rolls it between forefinger and thumb until it makes a thin ribbon, holds it to the window. When light shows even through the wet white, he nods and sets the lid back as if lowering a child into sleep. A handful of sizing gelatin boiled last night from clean clippings. A whiff of alum waits for its hour. Paper that resists ink is a sin here, paper that drinks to eager is a nuisance. We aim for the middle and find it by habit. The vatman's platform sits near the warm wall, under a window that knows how to keep glare kind. A copper vat, like a shallow well, receives pulp and keeps it at the temperature fingers forgive. On the rail, mould and decal pairs in 3 sizes. Each mould a frame laced with wire-laid and chain-laid wires close, chains farther. And in the field, a sewn watermark, a wire crown and cipher bent by a hand that learned to persuade wire with the same patience other hands spend on rope. The watermark is not a shout, it is a habit we let light discover later and smile. Vatman and Kucher work as one machine with 4 hands. The vatman dips the mould, edge first, then level lifts slow, lets water talk through the mesh, shakes north-south, then east-west, tiny moves that settle fibre like snow that has decided which way to lie. A sheet forms wet felt of future almost breathing. He slides the decal away, turns the mould, and lays the sheet in a kiss onto the felt waiting on the couching horse. The Kucher lifts the corner with a square of brass, peels the sheet off the mould, presses it to the felt, and flops the felt forward. Felt, sheet the post grows, 8, 10, 12, until the stack reaches the mark, cut into the horse rail. No one speaks unless a new hand misses a shake, and even then the correction is a touch on the wrist. If your thoughts stretch thin here and drift toward the window, nothing rebels. The vat keeps its warmth, the mould makes its quiet grids, the felt receives, as it always has patience as breadcloth. At the screw press, wood answers expectation like a friend who always brings the right coat. To men slide the post in the platens, meet the screw comes down under a bar carried by shoulders that know where to stop. Water runs in a clear sheet from the stack, down channels cut in the board, into a trough or bucket. The press does not moan, it hums, and that is enough. Pages that were breath firm up to skin. The post returns to the couching horse to hands separate felt from sheet. Sheet from felts hang on the line, to dry sheets rise to the laying loft in the arms of a girl whose apron has learned not to snag. The loft is a forest of lines and wooden pegs, the kind of place where time practices balance. Sheets hang by their corners in pairs over horsehair cords, laid to leave air between them like propriety at a church door. A broom leans in a corner. Bristles straight, dust is light here, and a broom works less than in rooms where coal rules. When the paper has learned itself for the day, stacks move to the sizing table. A trough of warm size waits, a brush sits in it like a promise. Each sheet goes over a rod, is dipped clean and even, comes up, and drains over the trough until its shine drops to a steadier wet. On the table beyond, a pair of polished rollers, calendars stand ready to kiss surface into a gentleness pens admire. Down the lane, the print shop carries a different sort of order. The composing room smells of ink linseed and lampblack of sorts metal, and the dust that lives in books old enough to stop insisting. A compositor stands before his case, upper and lower, caps above, smalls below. Each pigeonhole its letter, its width, its attitude. He picks by feel when eyes get tired. Then he loads the composing stick, left hand carrying the world, right hand giving it letters. He spaces with hair leads until the line behaves. He sets the last word. Slides in a thin brass. He will remove later when he remembers. We do not shout instead. He drops in a period and looks privately pleased. The stick empties into a galley, the galley into a chase. Coins take a key and hold the form true against the cheeks. A boy inks the balls. Old wool stuffed into leather domes mounted on handles, the way his grandfather learned. Though the big iron cylinder pressed down the hole whispers about tomorrow. He strikes the ink slab with a knife, works the paste with the balls until it strings like syrup. Then taps the form, to taps, twist, to taps enough to feed without spilling. The pressman chalks the tympan bait with a soft hand, so paper won't slide. He lays a sheet, folds the frisket, swings the bed under the platen, and draws the bar. Wood groans quietly. The platen rests a heartbeat and rises. The sheet comes off. The ink is black and crisp. Letters stand like nails hammered flush by a proud carpenter. He pegs the sheet on a drying line, then makes another. A steady rain of pages establishes the day. Back in the mill, the watermark wire gets a glance. The crown's curve sits true. The cipher reads clear against a lamp brought under the sheet. The laid lines break it like thin water. The foreman smiles down at his thumb. The mark is crisp under a thumb's width of light. It will be crisp under any eye that cares to find it later inside a drawer, in a court, or on a desk by a samovar, where a letter begins with "Dear Sir" and ends with a signature that needs a paper worth sitting on. He rolls the mold edge with a fingernail to feel where the lashing might have loosened. It has not. A prayer here is just another name for maintenance done yesterday. The binder's room waits for rain that doesn't come, hence the window stays open to the same river that gives the mill its pulse. On a long bench, gatherings folded to signature marks, a sewing frame with tape stretched neat, needle and thread waxed until they carry their own memory. End papers marbled with patterns the river might envy. A woman opens a section with a bone folder, kisses the fold flat, stitches through the kettle stitch and along, listening to thread sing that tiny high tune wax makes. She sets the book block between boards, glues the spine with a brush that remembers to keep glue out of places. Glue gets ideas, lines head and tail, and sets the whole into a press that will teach the spine to be a curve people like to keep in their hands. A man trims edges on a plough, the old sliding cutter, not the new guillotine the city likes to brag about. The plough whispers wood on wood as it rides. The runner curls of white paper accumulate in a box. One curl jumps to the floor and the cat, pretending indifference, touches it with a paw and lets it be. Leather 4/4 binding gets skive thin. At the turn-ins pace goes on with restraint. The cover boards meet the text with a drop that makes no sound, only a rightness between angles. A brass hand wheel takes the press down, not to punish, to persuade. Titles wait for gold along the spine. But that is the afternoon's brag. Morning has been 4 hinges and cloth that lies flat. If you want to rest your eyes here, settle them on a stack of sheets leaned against a peg. They will be sheets when you open them again. Ink will dry the way ink dries. No one rushes paper into being without causing trouble, and nobody here is in the trouble business. Noon gives over to lunch, bread with caraway, a thick slice of cheese, a cup of tea that knows how to be sweet when asked and plain when not. A tin of salt where's the thumb dips of 3 generations. A knife, old as a promise, divides a small apple 4 ways. Someone tells about a load of rags found wrapped around a military coat with to brass buttons, not yet stolen. Wonder at how such little empires survive in sacks destined for pulp. Someone else tells about a batch to shy with size last winter. The whole room makes the noise men make when a truth tastes like work, and nobody minds the flavor. Afternoon, and the calendar sings the low song metal sings when it does its best. No scrape, just a hum. To men feed a web of sheets, to others catch, lay, and jog. Fingers square stacks, heels bump jog smartly. The calendar's pressure teases gloss into the face, so nibs will ride without biting. The foreman checks a sheet with a steel pen and a thought. It takes ink with dignity and no bleed. He nods to the sizing table. That was the exact right spoon, not a drop more. At the edge of the room, ream wrappers blue, stout weight with the watermark's name printed quiet in one corner. A string lies and loops. The girl who ties reams cannot in her sleep without making a habit of sleeping on duty. In the print shop, forms change. A notice to call in accounts, an almanac sheet with sunset in a column. Small icons and tiny moons, a map engraved on copper weights for the press down the corridor that does intaglio's kiss with paper damped and soft. The etcher warms a plate, wipes ink with the palm half gloved, leaves color in the lines and clears the ground until copper shines. The bed rolls under the heavy cylinder. Blankets whisper. Pressure persuades ink to marry fiber. The sheet comes away and holds the river turn and the hill line as if a flood had left them there. He inspects the corner for a tiny burr. It is gone, a slip of paper. Earlier performed surgery success tastes like no taste at all, only relief. A messenger from the ministry boots clean. Seal tied brings a packet to Fool's Cap. He opens the flap only far enough to be polite and slides out a sample with the watermark and chain lines measured by a printed rule stuck to a slip of card. He turns the sheet, light shows the crown true. The cipher not twisted in its wire he knots. The clerk writes the date in the bound book and the number of reams accepted. They press the mill's blind stamp. A dry impression you find by touch more than sight. On the corner near the watermark paper, shaking hands with itself. The messenger rolls the sheets with a care he didn't teach himself and leaves with the packet bound in tape, whose ends tuck themselves in like to children that promise to share a blanket. Late day brings the binder's gold tool out. A little stove warms a pallet. A roll with a pattern, no I will count, but every I will feel. The letters get set one by one in a hand tool, heated on a clean plate. Kissed to a square of gold leaf resting on the spine, pressed and lifted to leave their shallow glow. Somewhere a clerk will run a finger along those letters 100 times and not say why he likes the book, only that it feels like something that will someday separate a memory from a boast. Back in the mill, the last vat sheets become the last couch. The press drops one more time. The felts hang like quiet flags and drip. The beater gets rinsed water in, paddle slow, drain down, run clean until the water leaving is dull as glass that quit wanting to be interesting. The molds go to their rack, wires down, so the mesh doesn't learn a bad bend. The watermark wire gets a small rub with a rag that holds no grit. The decals lean at the same angle all winter, an angle a shoulder, confined in the dark during a thunderstorm when a leak teaches the roof to grow up. In the print shop the form gets distributed. The compositor stands with stick and sorts the day backward. N into N, E into E, punctuation like seeds into their proper bends. A boy wipes ink balls with oil and flour and cuffs the balls will sleep under a cloth. The press bed gets oiled, the tympan sponged, the frisket hung from its peg. They lower the bar to its rest and lay a rag over it for the night. The rag holds the smell of 1,000 pulls, and no single page that is the right smell. Evening tips in with a color only rivers know, blue like a conversation that faded but left everyone friends. A samovar in the office clicks against itself as it settles the gasket under the tap, says enough, enough, then quiets. The foreman moves a small weight on the clock shelf, a level to let the pendulum's swing stay even. He closes the ledger on a dot drawn at the end of the line. VAT 2 good watermark true, sheets 18 post size, 1 ladle press, no complaint. He leans the pencil into the spine groove with a pleasure anyone could understand, whoever liked tools. You can close your attention for a while here and nothing will scold. Not water, not paper, not letters arranged in their tidy compartments. The pages in the loft will become themselves by midnight without pressing for your witness. Last duties. The wheel sluice lowered half aboard. The race hushed to a nighttime version of its song, a rag rolled against the mould edges. To keep iron from thinking about orange by morning, a broom set bristles up, a window stick laid on the sill to remind whoever opens first to do it with 2 hands. The binder ties an apron on a chair back because tomorrow sometimes forgets where it should begin. The compositor hangs his composing stick on its hook with its mouth open, so no one will imagine it is a drawer and burden it with coins or cares. Outside, the river carries the mill's small lights like coins the night one honestly A cart rolls by with 3 bales wrapped in blue paper and tied by a string, whose bow looks proud without any reason to be. Down the street, behind a different door, the pressman will be stacking broadsides with this mill's crown faint in them, a watermark like a promise that paper has made to ink since these machines were younger. A clerk in a file room will set a pen to one of those sheets and write something that makes a day easier for someone else. A receipt, a letter home, a list for market, a line for a book where a boy will put his finger to follow it along like rope and learn to want more lines. The 9th part. Snow sits quiet on the cloister roof, not eager to go anywhere. Inside the south workshop, warmth keeps to the low air where hands live. A bench runs along the wall under a window that gives the day without glare. On the bench, linden planks plane to a hush and adze with a round belly for hollowing a toothed plane. For rougher smooth plane for the last pass, a pot with warm rabbit glue, a bowl with chalk ground fine, a bag of linen rags that were sleeves before they became lint. The smell is glue, wood, and a little smoke. It is a clean smell, the kind that tells a day that will not be wasted. We start with the panels. Linden split straight if you ask. The joiner has been asking 4 years. He lays to planks edge to edge and rubs the seam with a chalk whisper. The chalk opens the truth. High here, low there. He sets the plane blade thin and makes passes that feel like breathing. When the seam draws light along its length without showing a gap, he warms the glue with a flat stick, paints a line, and presses the edges. To clamps draw the boards into one body, a narrow tongue in each end, takes a cross pattern, so the panel won't teach itself to twist in a mood. He sets the adze into the center and hollows a shallow carved checker recessed field to hands wide, not deep, just enough to give the painting a seat. He works from the edge inward until the scoop sits even. The adze leaves small flats, like fish scales. The smooth plane takes them away. Gesso, here they call it levkas, comes next. Chalk goes into the bowl with warm glue until it makes a cream that coats a stick and falls in plain ribbons. A boy strains it through linen until the lumps confess themselves and die in the cloth. The panel gets a skin of linen, glued on wet and brushed until it lies like a quiet shirt. Then the first coat of levkas, thin, and then a second thicker, and more after each has found itself. Each coat dries to a dull egg, and a scraper, not sharp enough to be a knife, takes ridges down until the field would accept a hair and not complain. A thumb run across the face finds the small fault. The thumb remembers to tell the scraper. By noon the panel looks like a stone taught to be easy. Egg tempera does not forgive hurry. Pigments live in small shells with paper lids tied on with string. Green of malachite, blue of azurite, red that learned from mercury and must be treated with respect, yellow from earth that once met saffron. The grinder adds a drop of water on a glass, makes paste with a muller until the paste walks slow on the plate. He brings yolks in a bowl, pricked and lifted with fingers, so the skin stays behind. A little wine or water thins the yolk to an emulsion. He cuts coloring with a small brush until it obeys. On a scrap, a test stroke dries within a minute to a quiet flat that loves light without reflecting it. Gold needs its own corner. Bowl red clay with glue warms near a brazier until it thinks it lives in flesh. The gilder lays bowl over the nimbus and the tiny borders where gold should live. He breathes on bowl with a breath that belongs to winter rooms and sets a leaf on the warm skin. A squirrel brush chases the leaf into corners. The leaf obeys where bowl asked and refuses. Where bowl forgot, small crumbs climb the brush and vanish into a jar for patching later. He stones the gold with a tooth until it blushes harder, then leaves it to harden before he draws lines with a stylus to teach light where to break. You can let your eyes go soft in this room. The panel will be panel. The levkas will become the surface hands like to touch even though they never should. The egg will find pigment and be its friend. Seconds lengthen without penalty. Work in such places expects you back when you return. Across the court, a bell pit waits under a roof shed. The ground holds a circle lined with brick. A pattern board leans against a post. A wooden head core and false bell shape made from ribs and clay sits on a spindle. To mend plaster the core with Loam River sand, clay, horsehair, and chaff layer after layer, each smoothed with wet hands that have learned to be measuring tools. Over the core, they build the false bell in wax, thickness marked by a gauge stick shoulder, waist, sound bow, lip. A third man carves a simple garland and letters in the wax, prayer, date, a little cross. Nothing clever. A bell is language that should be understood by any field and any farm. The mold grows heavier by reasonable increments. Clay goes over the wax in more coats, each beaten with a wooden paddle to press out air. A ring of iron bands hugs the mold. Not for show, fire will try to open it later. A charcoal brazier dries the surface until it does not shine. Then the fire. Coals stacked around the outside lick the clay, the wax inside softens, runs and leaves. A small channel catches the wax to keep it from teaching the floor to be a mess. When the smoke clears and the mold is proper dry, they lower it into the pit onto rollers and wedges. To cup sprues sit ready to receive metal. One vent whispers. Overhead, the roof crossbeam accepts a tackle. A bucket of dry ash stands nearby. Dry earth sits in a tub. A broom leans. All of that will be important exactly once. Back in the icon room, drawing begins. The master pricks a cartoon with a needle. Dust of charcoal rubbed through makes a constellation on the panel. He connects dots with the light hand of someone who trusts his elbows. Faces begin with earth colors, not with eyes. Flesh tones are built from shadows up. Greenish underpaint for hollows. Rosier passes for warmth. Light from the left, because the window knows its place. The brush is small, it moves with a wrist that learned patience at a watermill, not in a school. Garments come by planes. Dark lake, middle, a breath of light at the fold crest. Then a narrow line of an even lighter shade that makes the fold say its name without shouting. He breathes between strokes because not breathing teaches hands to hurry. At a side bench, a candle maker lifts a rack, strings dangling like rain down from a yoke. A pot of clean beeswax sits in a water bath that moves only slightly. He dips the strings, raises them, lets the wax set, then dips again. Each pass adds a skin. The rack goes on a stand, a second rack follows, then a third in rotation. The candles grow. The room smells warm and sweet. A few stray bees dried in the window, frames last month, and have nothing left to tell. When each candle meets the thumb test firm, not hard, he trims bases with a blade and lays bundles in paper, 5 and 5, tied with linen tape. Wicks from flax keep their twist. They remember flame without noise. In the refectory kitchen, rye flour turns into dough under hands that do not bark orders. A baker sifts with a willow sieve. He measures salt without looking, because he has been the same person for enough winters that his wrist knows it. A wooden spoon lifts sour from a crock leaven older than the youngest brother, younger than the oven. Boards carry loaves to the mouth. A peel slides them in. A door of oak closes like a sensible gate. The oven's breath seeps into the hall and talks to another breath from the icon room's glue part and another from the bell pit's brazier. These smells live together without needing to raise their voices at one another. If your attention slips toward the window where snow crystals sit like ground glass, none of these rooms will mind. Bowl will dry without gossip. The candle will keep its shape. The dough will find its lift where it always finds it. Toward midday, the foundry sends for copper. Ingots stacked by the wall gleam like old coins. Tin hides under oilcloth away from damp. The alloy has a memory. Too much tin. The bell grows brittle. Too little, and it forgets how to speak far. The founder has gauges, and he also has ears. He will taste the pour like a baker tastes salt. He sets the crucible black, thick into the pit furnace. Onto bricks charges copper. First heat climbs. When the bath shows an even face, tin follows in measured pieces. A deoxidizer, a pinch of charcoal, and a slip of resin goes to the surface. A long spoon skims dross. He lifts a rod and watches the way metal falls from it. Quick thread, then broken beads. The beads tell him what he needs. He nods once, the small nod men make when the world agrees to keep its promises. Pouring is short and complete. The men raise the crucible by a yoke hooked into its ears. The lip kisses the mold cup. The founder tilts until a rope of light feeds the bell through the sprue. The sound is a thick hush. A second cup takes its share. Steam whispers from the vent and disappears. A little fire shows at a seam, a handful of ash pushed. There teaches it manners. The metal settles, the cup drops its meniscus, the founder sets the crucible back, half empty, on its bricks. He does not tell anyone what he thought in those seconds. He has learned to think where thinking belongs. The mold calls 4 hours. Nobody helps it. Help right now is harm. Men rake away coals and lay straw mats over the pit to temper the air. The floors dust sand, and ash goes back into the tubs for tomorrow. A broom argues gently with its caller and then stops. The handles on the tackle get a rub of tallow where rope will ride later. The only speech is about the bread and whether the honey jar in the pantry still holds enough to do right by it. The honey jar does. In the icon room, the master makes the small cut into gold to take lines for a halo's border. The stylus goes with a weight that is more listening than pushing. The metal takes the line and does not tear. He leans back and sees the hole.